that even queens aren't safe from a mad king. Tywin's voice softened, almost thoughtful. But Tommen is different. That boy can be a good king, if I am given the time to guide him. And Margaery, she's still a good queen, despite her misjudgment. Together, they can give this realm the peace it so desperately needs. He leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled before him, eyes narrowing as if considering every possible outcome. But right now, what this realm needs is a villain. Someone to hate, someone to take the fall for all of it. Baelish, or that whore, it makes no difference. Tyrion's stomach churned. His father's callous pragmatism was terrifying in its efficiency. He had always known Tywin would do anything for power, but to hear him speak so openly about sacrificing lives for the greater good, it chilled him. But she's innocent, Tyrion whispered, his voice strained. He looked up at his father, hoping for some glimmer of mercy, but he found none. Tywin's face remained a mask of icy control. I've done everything you've asked, Tyrion said, his voice rising in frustration. I married Sansa Stark. I've played the dutiful son. Tywin raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. Tyrion took a deep breath, steeling himself. But I love her. His voice broke slightly as he admitted the truth. Please, spare her. I'm begging you, father. For the first time, Tywin's expression shifted, but it wasn't compassion that softened his features. It was something colder, more calculating. He regarded Tyrion with the same detached scrutiny he might use when considering whether to sign a contract or lead an army into battle. Love, Tywin said quietly, his voice dripping with disdain. You are my son, Tyrion. Love is a weakness, a flaw you cannot afford. The woman is a complication, one I would have dealt with long ago if you hadn't been so insistent on keeping her. He rose from his chair, his gaze hardening once more. Your sentimentality blinds you to the greater game at hand. This isn't about you, or your feelings. It's about ensuring the survival of our house. Tyrion's heart sank, knowing his father's mind was already made up. He had played his hand, and he had lost. Baelish's arrest will serve its purpose, Tywin continued, his voice resolute. And if the whore must die to protect this family, then so be it. Tyrion opened his mouth to protest, to plead one last time, but the look in Tywin's eyes silenced him. There would be no reasoning with his father. Not now. Now, Tywin said, dismissing him with a wave of his hand, unless you have anything else to say, I suggest you prepare yourself. The trial will be announced soon, and I expect you to stand by your family, as you always have. Actually, Tyrion began carefully, his voice calm but deliberate, I came to ask your leave to return to Casterly Rock. I want to take Sansa home. Tywin glanced up from his desk, his expression one of mild indifference. You are more than welcome to take your wife back to the Rock, he said, waving a hand dismissively, after the trial and after Tommen's coronation. Tyrion's jaw tightened. He knew his father well enough to anticipate the resistance, but he also knew he couldn't back down. Not this time. Sansa is pregnant, Tyrion said suddenly, the words hanging in the air between them like a loaded crossbow. Tywin's eyes snapped to his son, a flash of surprise crossing his face before he quickly masked it. He rose to his feet, slowly, deliberately, as if weighing the implications. For once, Tyrion had managed to get his full attention. We discovered she was with child just before Joffrey's wedding, Tyrion continued, keeping his gaze steady on his father. This child matters to me, he said, and then, more pointedly, I know it matters to you too. Tywin stood silently for a moment, his mind clearly racing as he digested the news. A legitimate Lannister heir, the blood of the North and the South united in one child, a potential bond between House Lannister and the Stark legacy. It was more than just a grandchild, it was a strategic asset. Tywin's calculating nature couldn't ignore the possibilities this brought to the table. I would like to take my wife and our child somewhere calm and safe, Tyrion pressed, where they can remain undisturbed until the birth. King's Landing is no place for her right now. The city is on edge, the Tyrells and the Martells are circling, and gods only know what Cersei might do next. Sansa deserves peace, not to be caught in the middle of all this madness. Tywin regarded his son with that same, unreadable expression he always wore when weighing the value of something, or someone. His face remained impassive, the lines of age and power etched deep, but Tyrion could see the subtle shift in his eyes, the flicker of thoughts moving rapidly behind them. The gears of Tywin Lannister's mind were always turning, calculating the angles, assessing the worth of every piece on his board. "And the child is?" Tywin began, his voice cold and precise, as though discussing a business transaction rather than the life of his own grandchild. "Mine," Tyrion replied firmly, holding his father's gaze without flinching. "Without a doubt." For a long moment, Tywin said nothing. His expression remained stoic, but Tyrion knew his father well enough to sense the weight of this revelation sinking in. Tywin had long since written him off as an unworthy son, a disappointment, a stain on the Lannister name. But now, with the death of Joffrey and the fragile hope of Tommen, Tyrion knew he was once again useful. He was no longer just the disfigured son, he was the father of a potential heir. A child, part Lannister, part Stark, a union that would solidify their power in the north. "Well," Tywin finally said, his voice low and measured, "I suppose congratulations are in order." There was no warmth in the words, no true pride, but Tyrion detected a subtle shift, a grudging acknowledgement of his new importance. The son Tywin had so often dismissed now held something of immense value. But Tyrion knew better than to be fooled by this temporary recognition. His father's approval was never freely given, and this child, while useful, would serve Tywin's interests first and foremost. The old lion was already planning, already thinking about how to best use this grandchild to further the Lannister legacy. "How far along is she?" Tywin asked, his tone more clinical than curious. "Early enough that it's still a secret," Tyrion replied. "But we'll need to move quickly if we want to keep it that way." Tywin's eyes narrowed slightly. "You've already decided then, this trip to Casterly Rock? You want to hide her away?" Tyrion met his father's gaze steadily. "I want to keep my wife and child safe, yes. The longer we stay in King's Landing, the greater the danger. You know as well as I do that the court is no place for a pregnant woman, not with Cersei on the warpath and whispers flying through the city." For a moment, Tywin said nothing, his gaze fixed on his son as if searching for a weakness, a crack in the armor. But Tyrion held firm. He wasn't the frightened boy Tywin had tried to crush under his heel for years. He was a husband now, and soon to be a father. And despite his father's scorn, he knew this child was a lifeline, a bargaining chip that would keep them safe, at least for a little while. "Very well," Tywin finally said, his voice cold but laced with an undercurrent of acceptance. "You may take her to Casterly Rock. But understand this child is more than just your heir. It is a Lannister. And I will not have anything jeopardizing its future. Do you understand me?" Tyrion nodded, his jaw tightening. "I understand." "And you will return," Tywin said, his tone even sharper, as though daring Tyrion to defy him. "As soon as Sansa is settled, you will come back to King's Landing and serve as a judge in the trial." "That is not up for discussion." Tyrion squared his shoulders, his chin lifting ever so slightly in defiance. "No," he said firmly. The word hung in the air, thick with tension, the silence that followed almost unbearable. "I will not return to be part of this farce. I will stand aside as the trial proceeds, I won't interfere, but I refuse to take part in it. You have your scapegoat, father, Baelish, Shae, whoever you decide to pin the blame on. But I won't be here to watch you manipulate the outcome." Tywin's face tightened, his lips a thin, bloodless line. "You think you have a choice in this, Tyrion? You will do as your duty demands." "Duty?" Tyrion laughed, though there was no humor in the sound. "Duty demands I serve this family, that much I know. I married the Stark girl when you commanded it, despite her loathing me and despite my own objections. I became the heir to Casterly Rock, something you never wanted but accepted because there was no one else. And now you ask me to judge a trial that will end in the death of people who may well be innocent." Tywin's eyes flashed with impatience, but Tyrion pushed forward, his voice rising in passion. "I have done everything you've asked, everything. I've bent to your will time and time again. But I will not sit in judgment over this sham trial. I will not stand beside you as you sentence people to death to suit your plans." He took a breath, calming himself before continuing. "What I will do is return to Casterly Rock and fulfill my duty as the heir. You wanted me there, didn't you? To rule in your name, to secure the future of the Lannisters, to produce heirs. Well, I've done 2 of those things, father. I've taken a suitable wife, and now she's carrying your grandchild. But you have to let me do the last. Tywine remained silent, his jaw clenched, his cold eyes locked on his son. He was not used to being spoken to this way, especially by Tyrion. But Tyrion didn't stop. I will return to Casterly Rock with Sansa, and I will stay there. I'll rule as your heir, and I'll ensure the line of House Lannister continues. But this trial, I want no part in it. I refuse to watch you orchestrate another twisted scheme, or see the faces of the condemned when you've already decided their fate. You have Jaime and Cersei here, let them play the game. I'm done. For a moment, Tywine said nothing. The tension in the room was palpable, a heavy weight pressing down on them both. Tyrion could feel the heat of his father's anger simmering just beneath the surface, but he didn't flinch. He had made his choice. Finally, Tywine leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. You think you can just walk away, Tyrion? You think that because you've married and produced a child, your duty is done? You are still my son, and as long as I live, you will do as I command. Tyrion met his father's gaze, his own eyes dark with resolve. I am your son, he said quietly, but I am also more than just a pawn in your game. You wanted an heir, and I've given you one. But I will not let my child, or my wife, become part of your machinations. Not this time. Tywine's eyes flickered with something, a brief spark of calculation, perhaps even a trace of grudging respect. But his voice remained cold, unyielding. You'll return to the rock, he said, each word clipped and deliberate. But understand this isn't your escape, Tyrion. You are still bound to this family, to me, whether you like it or not. And one day, you will be called upon again to serve. Tyrion gave a small, bitter smile. Perhaps. But for now, I'm taking Sansa home. And that's the only thing that matters to me. Tyrion nodded, turning to leave the room. His heart pounded in his chest, and he knew that this small victory was only temporary. His father would never truly let him go, never release him from the chains of their family's legacy. But for now, at least, he had won this battle. He had secured a safe path for Sansa and their child, away from the Viper's Nest of King's Landing. And for that, he was willing to pay whatever price came next. Chapter 42, Robb 14. Chapter text. Robb 14. The journey back to the north, which Robb had hoped would be a reprieve from the chaos of King's Landing, quickly proved to be fraught with challenges. The first problem arose with the arrival of letters, sealed with wax and carrying news from the south. Petyr Baelish had been arrested, and among the many letters was one from Margaery Tyrell, pleading with Robb to return to King's Landing and take part in the trial. Margaery's letter was carefully worded, but beneath the flowery language was a thinly veiled demand, as if the future of the realm depended on Robb's presence at court. Then came letters from the twins and Riverrun, each one more troubling than the last. The war was officially over, and Walder Frey, ever the Vulture, was demanding payment for his loyalty, or what passed for loyalty in Free terms. The marriage Robb had promised between Edmure Tully and Alex Frey now loomed over him like a debt to be collected. Walder's tone in the letter was unmistakably threatening, a reminder that his patience had limits, and the Starks owed him. Riverrun, too, was becoming a delicate matter. Hoster Tully, Robb's grandfather, was dead, and the Riverlords were not eager to swear loyalty to Edmure. The politics of the South might have faded with their departure, but the problems of the Riverlands were waiting for Robb like wolves at the door. But the most pressing issue was Roslyn. Her pregnancy, difficult even in the comforts of King's Landing, had become a true ordeal on the road. In the city, with its maesters and physicians, she had at least found small comforts, even if the stress of court life weighed heavily on her. Now, traveling the rough roads toward the north, those comforts were gone, replaced by the unrelenting realities of life on the move. She was sick most days, nausea overtaking her from sunrise to sunset. Even the slightest smells or movements seemed to unsettle her, and there was little they could do to alleviate her discomfort. Roslyn, always so gentle and steadfast, insisted they press on. Her quiet determination was admirable, but Robb could see the toll it was taking on her. Her face had grown pale, her body thinner with each passing day, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were endangering both her and their child by continuing at this pace. Each time they stopped, Rob would glance back at her in the carriage, watching as she tried to keep her composure, but the pain in her eyes betrayed her suffering. Despite her protests, Rob knew in his heart that they couldn't continue like this. The north was still far away, and at this rate, Rosalind might not make it there safely. The northern roads, once a source of strength and belonging for him, now felt like a treacherous path threatening everything he held dear. The weight of his responsibilities, to his people, to his family, and now to his wife and unborn child, pressed down on him, making each decision feel like a step closer to ruin. And yet, despite all the complications, despite the letters calling him back to the south and the political news tightening around him, Rob's thoughts always returned to Rosalind. King's Landing was far behind them now, but its shadows still clung to them, and Rob knew that they couldn't outrun the consequences forever. But for now, his priority was clear. They had to slow down, find rest for Rosalind, and somehow make their way back to Winterfell, where she might finally find peace. That night, they had made camp by a small stream, the crackle of fires and murmurs of the men drifting through the stillness of the night. Rob returned to his tent, the weight of his burdens heavier than ever. As he approached, the maester assigned to accompany them on their journey was just stepping out, his face grim, his robes rustling in the cool evening breeze. "She cannot go on much longer, my lord," the maester said quietly, his voice tinged with the warning of what he had just witnessed. To continue at this pace would be to risk both her life and the life of the babe. Rob nodded, his face hardening as he absorbed the maester's words. "Thank you, maester," he replied, his voice tight with worry, though he tried to keep it steady. With a curt nod, the maester bowed slightly before moving off into the camp, leaving Rob standing at the entrance of his tent. Steeling himself, Rob pushed the flap aside and entered. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of herbs and the lingering warmth of a brazier, the dim light casting flickering shadows on the canvas walls. Rosalind lay on their shared bed, her frail form barely making an imprint on the furs beneath her. She was pale, her face drawn from exhaustion, but in her hand was a letter, its wax seal already broken. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she had been crying, but now they were distant, as though lost in thought. Rob's heart clenched at the sight of her, his fierce, brave wife now so fragile. He knelt beside her, his rough fingers brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "Rosalind," he whispered, concern lacing his voice. She stirred at his touch, turning her head to meet his gaze. The weariness was plain to see, but there was something else in her expression, something troubled, something unresolved. "What is it?" Rob asked softly, his eyes flickering to the letter in her hand. "Another message." Rosalind swallowed hard, her voice raw from days of illness. "It's from Riverrun," she whispered, passing the letter to Rob with trembling hands. "They are proceeding with the wedding. Even my father has made the journey. Alex, she's begging us to come." Rob glanced at the letter, his brow furrowing as he considered the implications. "Then we'll go to Riverrun," he said, his tone resolute. But Rosalind shook her head weakly, closing her eyes as if the very thought exhausted her. "No, Rob," she murmured, her voice fragile, almost a breath. "I don't want to slow us down, not for anything. Winterfell, the north, that's our home. I just want to get there. I don't care about anything else." Her words were laced with desperation, her exhaustion palpable, and it broke Rob's heart to see her so worn. Winterfell was the only destination she had the strength to focus on now. The rest of the world, the weddings, the demands of family and politics, meant nothing to her in this moment. Her words were filled with quiet desperation, and Rob felt a stab of guilt. He knew how much she had endured already, torn from her family, married into the chaos of war, and now enduring a brutal pregnancy on the road. Every day seemed to push her closer to the edge, and it was clear that she could not continue like this. "We're going to stop," Rob said firmly, taking her hand in his grip warm and reassuring. "We'll rest at Riverrun until you've had the babe. I won't risk you, Rosalind. Not for anything." Rosalind's eyes filled with tears, her throat tight with emotion. She squeezed his hand, though her grip was weak, the weight of her exhaustion heavy on her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I know you wanted them to be born in Winterfell. I've let you down." Rob's heart ached at her words, and he shook his head, leaning down to press a soft kiss to her forehead. "You've let no one down," he murmured gently. "You are my wife, Roslyn. You and our child are my family, our future. Winterfell can wait. Nothing is more important than you." Roslyn closed her eyes, a tear sliding down her cheek, and Rob stayed by her side, his presence a shield against the weight of her guilt and exhaustion. They would make it to Winterfell, when the time was right, but for now, Riverrun would be their sanctuary. As he sat beside her, his mind raced. The trial of Petyr Baelish, the Frey's demands, the fragile peace in the north, it all felt like a gathering storm, threatening to overwhelm them. But as he looked down at Roslyn, her face softened with a small, tired smile. He knew that, for now, his focus had to be on her. They would deal with the rest when the time came. But first, they had to survive the journey ahead. Just a few days later, they reached the towering walls of Riverrun. The journey had been relentless, and Rob had driven them forward with a single focus, getting Roslyn to safety. As they rode through the gates, the cold air of the Riverlands hit them, but all Rob could think of was his wife. The moment his feet hit the ground, a Tully footman approached him, bowing hastily. "My lord, Lord Tully and Lord Free await you in the great hall." Rob barely spared him a glance, his jaw tightening. "They can wait." His tone left no room for argument. He had more pressing concerns. Roslyn was the priority. He turned immediately to her carriage, where she sat pale and frail, her face etched with fatigue and pain. The sight of her made his heart clench with worry. She was gripping her swollen belly, her breaths shallow and uneven. She was still a moon away from her time, but the Maester had warned that the babe might come sooner. Much sooner. Gently, Rob reached in and helped her down, his arms steady around her as her legs wobbled beneath her. Roslyn leaned heavily against him, her body trembling from the effort. She winced, and he could feel how fragile she had become, the strength she had once shown now drained by the endless days of sickness on the road. "Easy, love," he whispered softly, holding her close as she clung to him. Her skin was cool to the touch, a far cry from the warmth she used to carry. "We're here. You can rest now." She gave a faint nod, her eyelids fluttering shut as the strength seemed to drain from her all at once. Her body sagged against him, her legs giving way entirely. Without hesitation, Rob swept her into his arms, cradling her against his chest. Her weight felt lighter than it should have, her once strong frame reduced by weeks of sickness and fatigue. Panic clawed at him, tightening in his chest as he felt how fragile she had become. "Maester!" Rob bellowed, his voice echoing through the halls with urgency. "Get me a Maester, now." His voice was raw, filled with a desperation he rarely allowed himself to show. The servants scrambled into action, but none were fast enough for him. Rob stormed through the corridor, carrying Roslyn as if she weighed nothing, his heart hammering with fear. Her head rested limply against his shoulder, her breathing shallow and uneven. Each breath she took seemed a struggle, and the sight of her pale, sweat-drenched face sent a fresh wave of terror through him. "Hold on, love," Rob whispered, his voice trembling as he hurried through the dimly lit corridors. His heart pounded with every step, fear tightening its grip on him. A servant appeared ahead, urgently gesturing toward a door at the end of the hall. Without hesitation, Rob headed straight for it, his words a desperate plea. "Please, just hold on." The door to the room swung open as he kicked it with his boot, and he laid her carefully on the bed, smoothing a hand over her damp hair. Her eyes remained closed, her face tight with pain. Her hand still rested on her belly, as if she were trying to shield their child from the struggle her body was enduring. Rob's throat tightened at the sight, his fear for both of them threatening to overwhelm him. "Stay with me," he murmured, brushing a kiss against her temple as he stroked her hair back. "Stay with me, Roslyn." The door banged open again, and the Maester rushed in, followed by a handful of attendants carrying supplies. Rob stepped back only slightly, refusing to leave Roslyn's side even as they began their examination. He watched every movement with hawk-like intensity, his knuckles white as he clenched his fists to keep from shaking. "She's exhausted, my lord," the Maester said, his brow furrowing as he examined her. "The child is coming, but we must be cautious. Her body is not ready for this, she's so weak." Rob's heart clenched painfully. He'd known the risks of continuing their journey, but he had hoped, foolishly, that they could make it to Winterfell before the baby came. Now, with Roslin lying so pale and fragile before him, he felt the weight of that choice press down on him like a mountain. "Roslin," he whispered, leaning close to her ear, "I need you to stay strong. I need you to fight, for both of us, for our child." She stirred faintly, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. Her fingers twitched in his grasp, a tiny, almost imperceptible response. Rob's chest tightened painfully, fear creeping deeper into his bones. In that moment, Robb Stark, the young wolf, felt utterly powerless. He would trade every victory, just to see Roslin smile again, to hold their child safely in his arms. But for now, all he could do was wait, his heart heavy with dread as the night stretched on and the storm inside Riverrun's walls began to rage. The walls seemed to close in, the air heavy with tension. Roslin's eyes fluttered open, her gaze weak but filled with emotion. She winced as another wave of pain coursed through her, but still, she managed to whisper, "I love you," her voice fragile and trembling. Tears brimmed in her eyes as she added, "Whatever happens." "Don't," Robb interrupted, his voice rough with barely contained fear. "Don't say that. Nothing is going to happen. You're strong, Roslin. You'll be all right. I need you." His grip tightened on her hand, as if holding on harder could somehow anchor her to him, to life. Roslin offered him a faint, sad smile, though the agony was clear in her expression. "You need to be with our child, Robb," she whispered, her voice cracking with the weight of her words. "You promised me, remember?" Robb's throat constricted, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He could barely manage to speak, his heart aching with the fear of losing her. "I remember," he whispered, his voice hoarse, trying to stay strong for her. But in that moment, all he could do was cling to hope, even as the uncertainty loomed over them both. The door creaked open again, and the midwives hurried in. The Maester began giving rapid instructions, and the room seemed to blur into a frenzy of movement. Robb stayed at Roslin's side, holding her hand, whispering reassurances even as fear consumed him. Outside, the sounds of Riverrun continued, oblivious to the storm brewing inside this small room. And as the hours dragged on, Robb Stark, who had weathered war and battles, now faced the most terrifying uncertainty of his life, waiting for the outcome of a battle he had no control over. The door creaked open, and the midwives rushed in with determined urgency, their arms full of linens and basins. The Maester's voice cut through the air as he gave rapid instructions, directing the midwives to prepare Roslin for what lay ahead. The room buzzed with activity, the air thick with anticipation and fear. Robb remained at Roslin's side, gripping her hand tightly as if his strength could somehow be enough for both of them. He whispered reassurances, though the tremble in his voice betrayed the terror he felt inside. "You're doing so well," he murmured, leaning closer to her, his forehead pressed against hers. "It won't be long now. Just a little more, my love. You're strong." Roslin's breathing was shallow, her face pale, drenched in sweat. Every contraction seemed to rack her body with pain, and though she was exhausted, her hand weakly squeezed his in response. She managed a faint smile through the agony, a glimmer of hope in her tired eyes. "Stay with me," she breathed, her voice barely audible. "I'm here. I'm not leaving," Robb whispered, his heart breaking as he watched her struggle. He had faced enemies on the battlefield, stared death in the face more times than he could count, but nothing had ever terrified him like this. The fear of losing her, of being powerless to protect the woman he loved, gripped him tighter than any blade. Hours bled into each other as Robb sat motionless beside Roslin, his hand intertwined with hers, never letting go. Her breaths came in shallow gasps, and she drifted in and out of consciousness, each return to awareness filled with agony. Every time her eyes fluttered open, they met his, pleading, full of pain, and laced with the fear they both shared but refused to speak aloud. He would offer her reassurances, soft whispers of love and comfort, though the words felt hollow in the face of her suffering. He had fought battles, led men into war, but this, watching his wife struggle through something so fragile and relentless, was a torment he could not bear. The midwives and the Maester hovered around them, their faces grave as they tried to convince him to step away, to let them do their work. They urged him to join his uncle and Walder Free in the Great Hall, where they were awaiting news. "The birthing chamber is no place for you, my lord," one of the midwives had said gently, as though trying to protect him from the horrors unfolding before him. especially during a birth as gruesome as this. But Rob refused, his gaze never leaving Rosalind. He had promised her, promised that he would never leave her again, and no matter what the maester or anyone else said, he wasn't going to break that promise now. "I'm staying," he had said firmly, his tone brooking no argument. They had given up trying to convince him after that, leaving him in silence, save for Rosalind's faint moans and the tense, whispered instructions passed between the midwives. The night stretched on, dark and heavy, a suffocating weight pressing down on Rob's chest. He had faced long nights before, waiting for dawn after a battle, wondering who would survive and who would not. But this was a different kind of battle. One he had no control over. One where his sword and strength could do nothing to change the outcome. Sometime deep into the night, the maester approached him. The man's face was drawn with exhaustion and concern, his hands wringing nervously at his sides. "My lord," he began softly, his voice pulling Rob out of the daze he had fallen into, the fog of fear and helplessness clouding his thoughts. "There has been no change. She is too weak to deliver the child, and the baby's becoming distressed." Rob's heart clenched painfully at the words, his hand tightening around Rosalind's. The maester's gaze was sympathetic but firm as he continued, "We can keep pushing her, but there will come a point when her body will give up. If that time comes, my lord, we must know your wishes. Should we choose the mother or the child?" The words hit Rob like a physical blow, knocking the breath from his lungs. For a moment, the room seemed to spin, the weight of the decision crushing down on him. How could anyone be asked to make such a choice? His eyes moved to Rosalind's face, pale and strained, her lips dry and cracked from the hours of pain. She looked so fragile, so breakable, and the thought of losing her tore through him like a dagger to the heart. But then his gaze flicked to her swollen belly, to the child they had fought so hard for, the child that represented their future, the North's future. He had dreamed of holding his son or daughter, of raising them in Winterfell, of building the family that had been forced to leave behind. Rob swallowed hard, his throat constricting with emotion. "Can't you save them both?" he asked, his voice raw with desperation. The maester met his gaze, sympathy etched into the lines of his weary face. "I will do everything in my power, my lord." But if the time comes, his words trailed off, leaving the unspoken truth hanging in the air like a blade poised to fall. Rob's chest tightened, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His mind raced through the unimaginable, grappling with the cruel reality laid before him. He turned his eyes to Rosalind, her face pale, her body trembling as she fought through the agony of labor. She had given everything, her strength, her resilience, for the life they had created together. And now, in this fragile, terrifying moment, he was being asked to decide her fate. Rob's breath hitched, his voice caught in his throat as he leaned over her, brushing a gentle kiss to her damp forehead. His heart ached with the weight of it, breaking under the enormity of the choice he had to make. His voice cracked, barely a whisper as he fought back the tears burning in his eyes. "Save her," he murmured, his lips trembling. "If it comes to it, save my wife." The maester nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of Rob's words as he moved away, leaving Rob alone with the storm of his grief and fear. His hand tightened around Rosalind's, but even as he stayed by her side, the helplessness gnawed at him, knowing that the battle they faced now was one he could not fight for her. As dawn broke, pale light filtered through the window, casting long shadows across the room. Rob had been awake for hours, watching as the night dragged on, knowing that the end, one way or another, was near. The air felt thick with tension, and every second seemed to stretch unbearably. "My lord, it's time," the maester said softly, stepping forward with an urgency that made Rob's stomach twist. "She must deliver the babe now, if she's going to deliver it at all." Rob swallowed, turning to Rosalind. She was so pale, her skin clammy, her breaths shallow. He knelt beside her, gently brushing a strand of damp hair from her forehead. "Rosalind, my love," he whispered, trying to keep his voice steady, though fear gripped him. "You need to wake up. It's time. You need to deliver our child." Rosalind's eyelids fluttered, and for a moment, her gaze was distant, unfocused. When she spoke, her voice was a hoarse whisper, fragile as if it came from a place far away. "I can't," she murmured, her eyes glossed with tears. "I'm going to be with my mother, Rob. She's here, waiting for me." Panic surged through Rob, a cold wave of dread washing over him. He couldn't lose her. Not like this. No, he said firmly, his voice low but filled with desperation. You're not leaving me, Roslyn. You're staying right here, with me. You are so strong, you are a Stark now. He squeezed her hand tightly, feeling how weak her grip had become, but refusing to let go. You just need to push, my love. Just a little bit more, and our child will be here. Roslyn's lips trembled, and tears rolled down her cheeks as her eyes fluttered shut once more. Rob felt his heart breaking, but he leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. Please, Roslyn, he whispered against her skin. Stay with me. I need you here. Our child needs you. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath, as if time itself had stilled, waiting for her decision. With a sudden surge of energy that seemed to come from deep within her, Roslyn groaned and gripped Rob's hand as tightly as she could manage. The maester and midwives sprang into action, guiding her through the final moments of labor. Rob stayed by her side, whispering words of encouragement, his heart pounding in his chest. He watched her fight, the pain etched across her face, but also the fierce determination that flickered behind her eyes. And then, after what felt like an eternity, the sound of a newborn's cry pierced the heavy silence of the room. Rob exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, his chest tightening with overwhelming emotion. A midwife quickly bundled the infant in a soft cloth and brought the babe over to Rob, who stared down at the tiny, squirming figure in disbelief. A son, the midwife said softly, her voice gentle yet filled with hope as she placed the swaddled babe into Rob's arms. The tiny bundle squirmed and let out a faint cry, his small, fragile fingers grasping at the air. Rob stared down at his son, his vision blurring with tears he could no longer hold back. His throat tightened with emotion, the weight of the moment crashing over him. This was his child, their child, a piece of him and Roslyn brought into the world. His heart swelled with both joy and terror, the fierce instinct to protect the small life in his arms surging within him. But as he turned back to Roslyn, the joy that had filled the room only moments ago seemed to evaporate. She had gone still, her face as pale as the sheets beneath her, her chest barely rising with shallow, labored breaths. Panic gripped Rob's heart as he saw her collapse back against the pillows, her body limp and unresponsive. Roslyn. Rob's voice broke as he rushed to her side, but before he could even reach out, the maester and midwives sprang into action. The maester barked rapid orders, his face drawn with urgency as they worked to revive her. She's losing blood, the maester said grimly, pressing his hands against Roslyn's abdomen. We need to stop it, now. Rob felt his world tilt, a suffocating dread closing in around him. His knees felt weak, but he couldn't look away from her. He stood frozen, helpless, watching as the maester and midwives fought to keep her alive. Everything had happened so quickly, the miracle of their child's birth followed so swiftly by this terrifying uncertainty. The cries of his newborn son echoed faintly in the room, but Rob couldn't focus on anything but Roslyn. He knelt beside her bed, his hands trembling as he took hers, her skin cold and clammy to the touch. Roslyn, he whispered, his voice raw with desperation. Stay with me. Please, you have to stay. The maester worked feverishly, his brow furrowed with concentration. The midwives hurried back and forth, fetching bandages, potions, anything that could help, but Rob could feel the weight of their silence. He had seen that look before, the look of people battling the inevitable, and it terrified him. Roslyn's eyelids fluttered, her head rolling to the side, her once bright eyes dull with exhaustion. For a brief moment, her gaze met Rob's, and a weak, barely there smile tugged at her lips. Rob, she whispered, her voice so faint he had to lean in close to hear. Look after him, our son, for me. No, Rob said, his voice cracking as he gripped her hand tighter, refusing to let go. You're going to look after him with me. You're not leaving, Roslyn. You can't. She tried to speak again, but the effort seemed too much, her words fading into a faint exhale as her eyes began to close. Rob's heart pounded in his chest, each beat an agonizing reminder of how fragile this moment was. The maester looked up, his expression grim but not hopeless. She's weak, my lord. We've stopped the bleeding for now, but she's lost a great deal of blood. She will need time to recover, if she can. Rob's breath caught in his throat, and he nodded, his grip on Roslyn's hand never faltering. He didn't care what it took, how long it would take, he just needed her to survive. Their son needed her. He needed her. For the longest moment, the room was filled only with the soft sounds of their newborn's cries and the hurried movements of the midwives, trying to stabilize Roslyn. Rob watched as they worked, his heart aching with every second that passed, knowing that all he could do was wait and pray. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the maester stepped back, wiping his brow. She's stable for now, but her condition is fragile. Rest is what she needs most. Rob's body sagged with relief, but his heart remained heavy. He bent down, pressing a kiss to Roslyn's forehead, her skin still cold beneath his lips. "I'm here, Roslyn," he whispered, "and I'm not going anywhere." He stood there for a long while, cradling their son in one arm while holding Roslyn's hand in the other, watching over both of them. The battle wasn't over yet, but they had made it through the worst of the storm. And for that, Rob would forever be grateful. Chapter 43, Roslyn 17. Chapter text. Roslyn 17. All Roslyn could think of as she gazed down at the small bundle in her arms was how beautiful her son was. After a week of regaining her strength, of battling back from the brink, she was finally strong enough to cradle him on her own. The moment felt surreal, as if the whole world had shrunk to just this, a mother holding her child, her heart overflowing with a love she hadn't known she could feel so deeply. Her hands trembled slightly as she stroked his soft cheek, still in awe that he was here, that they had both survived the ordeal of his birth. The babe stirred gently in her arms, his tiny fingers curling against her chest, his breathing soft and steady. He was perfect in every way, with Rob's unmistakable features, those same striking blue eyes that held the fierce strength of his father and the soft auburn tufts of hair. Tears welled in Roslyn's eyes as she studied him, tracing every small detail as if trying to memorize it forever. His tiny nose, the faintest freckles dotting his cheeks, the way his lips pursed in sleep, it was like looking at a miniature version of Rob, but softer, more delicate. She couldn't believe this child, this little miracle, was theirs. "He has your eyes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, as Rob sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. She turned to look at him, her gaze filled with both exhaustion and overwhelming love. "He looks so much like you, Rob." Rob smiled, his eyes misty with pride as he leaned closer to peer at their son. "He's beautiful," he said softly, brushing a stray lock of hair from Roslyn's face and kissing her temple. "Just like his mother." Roslyn laughed quietly, though it was more of a gentle exhale, the kind that comes when one is too tired to laugh properly but too filled with happiness to hold it back. "I'm not so sure about that," she murmured. "But he's strong, just like you. He made it through, we both did." Rob's expression softened, and he cupped her face in his hand, his thumb gently brushing her cheek. "You fought so hard, Roslyn. I don't know how you did it, but you were so brave. I'll never forget that." She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a moment as the weight of the past days washed over her. The fear, the uncertainty, it all seemed so distant now, replaced by the quiet peace of this moment. The three of them together. "I couldn't have done it without you," she whispered, looking down at their son again. "Every time I wanted to give up, I thought of you, of him. You gave me the strength, Rob." He pressed a tender kiss to her forehead, his own heart swelling with emotion. "I'll always be here," he said softly. "For both of you." Roslyn smiled through her tears, her heart full. She cradled their son closer, marveling at how warm and solid he felt against her. She had been so afraid, terrified she wouldn't get to hold him like this, to see his eyes open and his small hands reaching for her. But here they were, alive and whole, and nothing else in the world mattered. She sighed contentedly, looking out the window of the chamber. The river glistened under the pale morning sun, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Roslyn felt at peace. This was their new beginning, and whatever storms still lay ahead, they would face them together, her, Rob, and their beautiful son. Rob sat beside Roslyn, watching her cradle their newborn son. A soft chuckle escaped his lips as he reached over to gently stroke the baby's head. "We need to choose a name," he said, his voice warm and teasing. "I can't keep calling him Pup forever." Roslyn smiled, her eyes never leaving their child as she rocked him gently in her arms. "Pup," she repeated with a soft laugh. "He already looks so much like you, maybe our little wolf pup suits him after all." Her gaze flicked up to Rob, filled with warmth, love, and pride. Rob leaned in closer, his large hand gently covering the back of Rosalind's. "He's strong," Rob said softly, his voice tinged with awe as he looked at their child. "Already a fighter. I can see it in him. I want his name to stand for something, something that honors our family, our history, and the North. A name that will remind him of the legacy he's born into." Rosalind tilted her head, watching Rob as his eyes lingered on their son. "Have you thought of one?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying a mix of curiosity and trust. Rob nodded, his voice dropping to a tender whisper. "I want to call him Torren." Rosalind blinked, a slow smile spreading across her lips as she let the name sink in. "Torren," she repeated, testing it on her tongue. "After the last king in the North." Rob said, his eyes growing serious. "He made a hard choice, but it was the right one, for his people, for his family. I want our son to understand that strength doesn't just come from battle, but from wisdom and sacrifice too." Rosalind's smile softened as she looked down at their son once more. "Torren Stark," she murmured. "It's a noble name, a strong one. He will carry it well." Rob kissed the top of her head, his hand still resting on hers as their child slept peacefully between them. "Our little Torren," he whispered. "A wolf of Winterfell." Rosalind closed her eyes, feeling Rob's warmth beside her and the weight of their son in her arms. "He will be great," she whispered, "just like his father." Rob chuckled softly. "No, love. He'll be even greater." Rob sat down gently on the edge of the bed, his weight causing the mattress to dip slightly as he watched Rosalind cradling their newborn son. There was a softness in his gaze, but a trace of concern too. He reached out, tucking a stray lock of her hair behind her ear. "Your father has asked to see you again," Rob said quietly, his voice laced with the hint of a sigh. Rosalind's brow furrowed as she looked up from the baby in her arms. "Has he?" she asked, her tone careful. "I've fought him off for days," Rob continued, a wry smile playing at the corners of his lips, "but I fear his patience is waning." He exhaled deeply, rubbing the back of his neck in a gesture of frustration. "Walder Free is not a man who enjoys being kept waiting, especially not when he sees an opportunity for a spectacle." Rosalind's lips pressed into a thin line, her fingers absent-mindedly stroking their son's tiny hand. "I imagine he's eager to have me paraded in front of everyone." Rob's expression softened further, though a spark of irritation lingered in his eyes. "They've delayed the wedding until you're well enough to attend," he explained. "Your father, he's keen to show off his success." The Lady of Winterfell, with her Stark husband and son, a triumph in his eyes. Rosalind let out a soft, mirthless laugh. "I suppose a daughter married to the Lord of the North, with a child to carry on the Stark name, is enough to make even Lord Free puff out his chest." Rob agreed, though his voice was tinged with bitterness. "He sees it as a prize, a victory to parade before his guests. But I'll not let him drag you before everyone while you're still recovering, Rosalind. He may think he can command everyone, but you're not his to flaunt anymore. You're mine, and I'll see to it that you have the rest and peace you need." Rosalind's gaze softened, her heart warmed by his protectiveness. She reached out, placing her hand on his, squeezing it gently. "Thank you, Rob," she whispered. "But we both know he won't stop pressing. He'll make a scene if we delay much longer, and besides I would like to be there for Alex. Rob's jaw tightened, and he glanced down at the small bundle in her arms, their son, sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the tensions swirling around them. "Let him try," Rob muttered under his breath. "I won't let him pressure you." Rosalind sighed, her expression weary. "I don't want a confrontation, not with him. It would only make things worse. Besides, I can handle my father. I've been doing it my whole life. Maybe it's better to face him now, rather than later." Rob frowned, his fingers tightening slightly around hers. "You're still healing, Rosalind. I don't want you overburdened." She offered him a faint smile, her eyes reflecting both affection and understanding. "I know you worry, but I'm stronger than I look, Rob. And I'd rather get it over with, for our son Sake." Rob looked down at their child again, his heart swelling with pride and love. He nodded reluctantly, his voice low. "All right. But we do it on our terms. And if you feel even the slightest bit unwell, we walk out." Rosalind smiled gratefully, her heart full as she gazed up at the man who had vowed to stand by her through all storms. Deal, she whispered, leaning up to brush a kiss against his cheek. Rob lingered there, savoring the closeness. He looked back at his wife and child. He knew one thing for certain, no matter what pressures loomed outside, this was his true battle, and he would fight to protect his family above all else. __________. Rob had managed to convince Rosalind to wait until the following day before venturing out of her chambers, insisting she take more time to ensure she was strong enough. She had reluctantly agreed, not wanting to worry him further, though she could see how determined he was to protect her from any strain. By the time morning came, maids bustled into the room, arms laden with gowns of silks and brocades, each more elaborate than the last. Rosalind had smiled softly, shaking her head at their eager suggestions. No, she had said, her voice gentle but firm. Not today. She turned away from the brightly colored gowns and chose something simpler, something that didn't feel like armor. A pale blue dress, light and soft, that didn't bind her tightly or weigh her down. She didn't need to dazzle anyone today, least of all her father. As the maids began to dress her, tying the laces with careful hands, they offered braids and pins for her hair. She nodded absently, allowing them to weave her brown locks into a simple plait, but her attention was elsewhere. Her gaze had drifted to Rob, who stood at the foot of the bed, cradling their newborn son in his arms. He was so gentle with Torrin, his large hands cradling the tiny bundle with a care and tenderness that made Rosalind's heart swell. Rob had faced war, led men into battle, and carried the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders, but here, in this quiet moment, he was simply a father, entranced by the fragile life in his arms. Rosalind watched him, the way his brow softened as he whispered something to Torrin, who was nestled against his chest. The baby's small fists waved in the air, and Rob chuckled quietly, brushing a finger over Torrin's auburn hair. There was such a tenderness in his touch, a love so pure that it nearly brought tears to Rosalind's eyes. She wondered if her own father had ever looked at her like that when she was born, if Lord Walder Free had held her with anything even resembling love or affection. Somehow, she doubted it. Walder Free had always been a hard, bitter man, obsessed with power and status. Children, to him, were assets to be married off or leveraged, not cherished. But Rob was different. He had a softness that she had not expected in a man of his stature, a vulnerability he allowed only in private moments like this. It was something she had fallen in love with, something that reassured her now more than ever. He wasn't just a lord, he was her husband, and the father of their son. He would fight for them, protect them with everything he had. As the maids tightened the final braid and stepped back to admire their work, Rosalind's eyes remained on Rob. She smiled softly, her heart full. "You're so good with him," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Rob looked up, his eyes meeting hers with a warmth that sent a wave of comfort through her. "He's perfect," he said quietly, his gaze returning to the baby in his arms. "He looks just like you." Rosalind chuckled softly, shaking her head. "No," she replied. "He's all you. The same eyes, the same fierce spirit." Rob smiled, though his expression was tinged with pride. "Perhaps," he said. "But he's got your strength, Rosalind. He'll need that in the days to come." Rosalind's heart clenched at his words, the weight of the world outside their chambers creeping back into her thoughts. She didn't know what her father would say, what pressures he might place upon them now that they were all back under one roof. But for now, she took solace in this moment, in the love that bound them together. She stood from the chair, adjusting the light gown as she made her way over to them, placing a gentle hand on Rob's arm. "We'll face whatever comes, together," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil she felt inside. Rob nodded, his eyes softening as he kissed her forehead, then glanced down at their son once more. "Aye," he whispered. "Together." As they prepared to leave their chambers, Rosalind briefly considered taking Torrin from Rob's arms, longing to feel her son close to her as they walked through Riverrun. But her body still felt weak, and she knew better than to push herself too far. The last thing she wanted was for her strength to falter and risk harm to their child. So, she left Torrin with his father, trusting Rob's strong and steady hands to carry their son safely. As they stepped into the corridor, Rosalind felt a sense of awe at the sight of Riverrun's beauty. It wasn't as grand or imposing as the Red Keep, nor was it as stark and cold as the Twins. Riverrun had a warmth to it, a sense of peace that she hadn't realized she craved until now. The stone walls were familiar yet comforting, and the air felt clean and fresh, filled with the soft sounds of the river flowing nearby. As they walked, Rosalind's thoughts wandered. She pictured Lady Caitlin growing up here, a young girl with auburn hair just like Rob's, running through these very halls. She imagined Caitlin's laughter echoing off the walls as she played by the river, unaware of the tragedies and hardships that would shape her life in the years to come. Rosalind could almost see her standing at the gates, a radiant bride on the day of her marriage to Eddard Stark, hopeful and full of dreams, and then the same girl stood at the same gates days later waving her husband off to war. And then her heart ached as she thought of the day Rob was born here, in this very castle. She imagined Caitlin, holding her newborn son just as she now held Torren, her eyes full of love and hope for the future. Rosalind could almost picture Caitlin pacing through Riverrun's halls with baby Rob in her arms, whispering lullabies to him, praying for his safety in the uncertain world beyond these walls. The thought of it brought a bittersweet smile to her lips. This place was more than just a castle, it was part of Rob's story, part of his family's history. Riverrun had seen both joy and sorrow, just as their own family had. And now, here they were, walking the same paths with their own son cradled in Rob's arms. It may not have been Winterfell, the place she longed to call home, but in this moment, Riverrun felt like a home to them. A place where their family could grow and heal, where Torren could feel the warmth and safety of his parents' love. Rosalind glanced over at Rob as they neared the great hall. He walked with pride, his head held high as he cradled their son close, his gaze occasionally flicking down to Torren with a soft, protective look. Her heart swelled with love for him, for the man who had stood by her side through everything, who had chosen her and their child over the chaos of war and politics. This may not have been the life she had imagined, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. Whatever lay ahead, whether it be her father's demands or the lingering uncertainties of the war, she knew they would face it together. This was their family, their future, and together they would build something strong and lasting, just as Caitlin had once dreamed for her own children. As they approached the doors of the great hall, Rosalind took a deep breath, ready to face whatever awaited them on the other side. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of quiet peace, knowing that within these walls, they had found a small haven. As the grand doors creaked open, the murmurs within the great hall fell silent. Rob stepped forward first, with Rosalind walking beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She felt a flutter of nerves, but also a deep resolve. This was her family now, and she would face whatever came with her head held high. At the far end of the hall, Edmure Tully sat on the river throne. Rosalind noticed immediately how uncomfortable he looked in his new position. His shoulders were stiff, and his eyes darted around the room, as if he still hadn't quite come to terms with the gravity of his new role. Rob had told her about Edmure's reluctance to lead, how the weight of responsibility had always rested uneasily on him, and now it showed more than ever. The loss of Hoster Tully, Rob's grandfather, was still fresh. Though Rob had been saddened by the news, there had been a quiet acceptance. Hoster had been gravely ill for a long time, and while his death left a hole in the family, there was some relief in knowing the old man's suffering had finally ended. The Riverlands mourned their lord, but it seemed the wheel of duty continued to turn. Standing beside Edmure, however, was a figure that set Rosalind's heart sinking, a man who looked more than comfortable, almost smug in his place of prominence. Walder Frey. Her father. His withered form was draped in fine robes, and his sharp eyes gleamed with something approaching triumph. It had always been clear to her that her father had ambitions far beyond the twins. He had coveted Riverrun for years, and now, with the marriage alliance between House Frey and House Tully looming, he seemed closer than ever to achieving his long-held desire. Rosalind had grown up knowing her father's ambitions, how he schemed and maneuvered to raise House Frey's standing. His voice had always been full of disdain when he spoke of the Tullys, especially Hoster, who had never seen the Freys as anything more than minor vassals. But now, Walder Frey stood in the great hall of Riverrun, basking in the power that had always eluded him. The marriage of Alex Frey and Edmure would cement the bond between their houses, and for the first time, Rosalind could see how close her father was to finally grasping what he had always wanted. "Nephew!" Edmure called out, rising awkwardly from the throne. His voice was strained, as if he were trying too hard to sound welcoming. "You've finally brought your wife and son to meet us." Rosalind caught the flicker of unease in Edmure's eyes as they landed on Walder Frey, who stood with a crooked smile, leaning on his cane. Though the Tully Lord was the rightful ruler of Riverrun, it was painfully obvious to Rosalind that her father wielded more influence in this room than Edmure did. A heavy tension hung in the air, one that seemed to grow with each passing moment. Rob inclined his head in acknowledgement, his grip tightening protectively around Torren. "Uncle," he replied, his voice calm but guarded. "I thought it time my family visited, as promised." Rosalind's gaze flicked between her husband and her father, feeling the subtle undercurrents of rivalry that swirled between them. Walder's gaze was sharp, calculating, as he studied his daughter with their newborn son. Though he said nothing, Rosalind could sense his pride in her, a rare feeling from a man who rarely offered praise to any of his children. "You're feeling stronger, daughter?" Walder Free rasped, his voice like the creaking of old timber. Rosalind gave a faint nod as he leaned forward slightly, his sharp eyes narrowing as they settled on Torren, swaddled in Rob's arms. "I knew you'd give me a grandson, just like your mother. She gave me 4 sons, all strong boys," he continued, his tone thick with self-satisfaction. "And he looks it too, a strong boy. A strong Free." His gaze lingered on Torren, as if already staking his claim, his words dripping with the pride of a man who saw the child as an extension of his own legacy. But Rob remained composed, though Rosalind could feel the tension in his body. "He is our future," Rob said evenly, his eyes meeting Walder's without flinching. "A Stark of Winterfell." Walder's eyes gleamed with satisfaction at the words, though his smile remained tight. "Indeed," he muttered, "a strong boy will be needed in the days to come." Rosalind felt a chill run down her spine, sensing the weight of those words. The old man always spoke in riddles, but the meaning behind them was clear. Their son, like everything else, was part of a larger game, one her father had been playing his entire life. As the formalities continued, Rosalind found herself drifting between the present and the future, wondering what it would mean to raise a child in a world filled with men like her father. She glanced at Rob, her hand finding his, and in that moment, she knew that whatever games were being played, they would face them together. This was their family. Their future. And no matter how many schemes or alliances swirled around them, they would protect each other, no matter the cost. "Now that Lady Stark is well again," Edmure Tully began, a faint smile crossing his face, "we can finally set a new date for the wedding. We postponed everything for your sake, my lady. Alex was beside herself at the thought of not having you by her side on her special day." Rosalind nodded politely, though her heart wasn't entirely in it. She felt the weight of expectation, both from Edmure's earnest kindness and the far less subtle impatience of her father. "The sooner, the better," Walder Free grumbled, his voice dripping with irritation. "Let's bloody get on with it. Never in all my years have I heard of something so ridiculous as postponing a wedding as important as this one, for a woman's recovery, a woman that isn't even the bride." His words were sharp, meant to cut, and his bony fingers drummed impatiently on the arm of his chair. Rosalind stiffened slightly at his dismissiveness, feeling a twinge of shame, but she remained composed. Walder had always been quick to dismiss the needs of others, particularly those of his daughters. She glanced at Rob, who tensed beside her but remained silent for her sake. "We all want the wedding to proceed, my lord," Rob finally said, his voice steady but cool as his eyes flicked to Walder Free. "But I won't force Rosalind to attend if she isn't ready." Rosalind looked up at her husband, grateful for his support. "I will be ready," she assured them, forcing a smile. "It's important for our families, and I wouldn't miss it." Even as she said the words, she felt the pressure mounting, not just from the wedding but from the many eyes watching her, waiting for her to fall back into her role as a daughter of Walder Free, as a player in this larger game. Walder snorted, clearly unimpressed by the sentiment. "Good. The sooner we unite our houses for good, the better. There's too much at stake for us to waste time." Edmure shifted uncomfortably in his seat, offering a more diplomatic response. "The arrangements will be made swiftly, my lord," he said, trying to smooth over his uncle's bluntness. "We've waited this long, a few more days won't harm anything." Walder's eyes gleamed with barely concealed irritation, but he didn't argue further. The tension in the room thickened, but the conversation turned to wedding logistics, leaving Rosalind feeling like a spectator at her own family's event. As the men discussed dates and alliances, Rosalind's thoughts wandered back to Torren, resting peacefully in Rob's arms. Whatever happened next, whatever was demanded of her, her focus would be on her son, and the life she and Rob were building together. The rest, weddings, politics, and the whims of powerful men, would just have to fall into place around that. Chapter 44, Margaery 3. Chapter text. Margaery 3. Over a moon had passed in the capital since Joffrey's death, and the city was beginning to shed its shroud of mourning. The black banners that had draped over every building and street corner were slowly being taken down. People, once cloaked in the dark garments of grief, were cautiously returning to their house colors, as though eager to leave behind the shadow of the late king. Soon, the only ones still clad in black were Margaery and Cersei. The mourning period for a king was traditionally longer, but it was clear that no one was eager to linger in memory of Joffrey Baratheon. The quicker his reign was forgotten, the better. Margaery knew this was only the beginning of the changes to come. The power in King's Landing was shifting, and she could feel it like the tides pulling her in directions beyond her control. She had to stay ahead, to keep her footing, or risk being swept away. Her grandmother, Lady Olenna, had already decided to return to Highgarden. Without her sharp mind and unwavering support, Margaery would be left to navigate the treacherous waters of the capital alone. Alone, except for her father, Mace Tyrell, a well-meaning man, but utterly useless when it came to the political intrigue of court. His presence offered her little comfort. He was a blunt tool in a city that required a scalpel. Margaery looked out over the Red Keep from her balcony, the early morning light casting a dull glow over the rooftops. The city below buzzed with its usual life, but there was an undercurrent of unease, whispers of what was to come. Tommen would be crowned soon, but her position as queen had never been more uncertain. She knew Cersei's eyes were on her, watching for any misstep, waiting for any opportunity to push her aside. Margaery had seen that look before, the cold, simmering anger beneath Cersei's grief. The Queen Regent had lost one son, and while she might dote on Tommen now, Margaery knew that Cersei's ambitions did not die with Joffrey. She would do anything to maintain control, to keep her claws in the Iron Throne. Tommen's gentler nature was a far cry from Joffrey's cruelty, but it also made him more vulnerable, to manipulation, to danger, and most of all, to his mother. Her grandmother had called on her early and invited her to take their breakfast in the gardens. Margaery had never felt this lost. Every step she took felt wrong. She had worked hard to secure friendships with Robb, Roslyn and Sansa, and now they were all gone, returned to their castles to start their lives, and she had been left behind, not a queen, not really a widow, not really anything. Margaery clung to her grandmother's arm as they strolled through the manicured gardens of the Red Keep. The air was thick with the scent of blooming roses, but Margaery could hardly appreciate it. "I can't believe you're leaving me here, alone with these people," she murmured, her voice edged with apprehension. "The time has come," my dear Olenna replied briskly, her tone matter-of-fact as always. "There's nothing more tedious than a trial, except perhaps these gardens. If I have to take one more leisurely stroll through them, I'll fling myself from the tallest tower like Queen Helena herself." Margaery chuckled despite herself. The sharp humor of her grandmother always had a way of cutting through the tension. "And besides," Olenna continued, her eyes glinting, "your mother cannot be trusted to arrange a proper marriage for your brother. What a pity about Sansa, truly. She would have made a fine lady of Highgarden, but alas, we must adapt. There's always another opportunity waiting." They arrived at a small table set by the edge of the garden, overlooking the glistening waters of Blackwater Bay. A modest selection of food had already been laid out, fruits, cheeses, and a pot of steaming tea. Olenna seated herself gracefully, her sharp eyes never missing a detail, while Margaery followed more slowly, her thoughts heavy. "Have you seen Tommen yet?" Lady Olenna asked, pouring herself a cup of tea. "No," Margaery admitted, shaking her head as she settled into her chair. "I don't even know if they've officially agreed to the match. No one tells me anything." Olenna raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "They will agree. The Lannisters are not in a position to refuse us, not now. Besides, if they had any sense, they'd thank their gods for a queen like you. I wasn't originally meant to marry your grandfather Luther, you know." Margaery glanced up, intrigued. Her grandmother rarely spoke of her own marriage unless it was to make a point. "No?" Margaery asked, half amused, half curious. "I always thought you and grandfather were perfectly matched." "Oh, well," Olenna waved her hand dismissively. "He was meant to marry my sister, your great-aunt Viola. I, of course, was destined for some Targaryen or other. Marrying a Targaryen was all the rage back then, but when I saw my intended, Prince Daeron, I think it was, twitchy little ferret face with that ridiculous silver hair, I knew he wouldn't do. So, the night before Luther was to propose to Viola, I got lost on my way back from an embroidery lesson and found myself in his chambers. How absent-minded of me. Margaery laughed as Olenna's eyes twinkled with mischief. The next morning, Luther couldn't even make it down the stairs to propose to my sister. The poor boy could barely walk. Olenna leaned in conspiratorially. And once he could, the only thing he wanted was what I had given him the night before. I was good, my dear. I was very, very good. And you, well, you are even better. Margaery's laughter faded as her grandmother's tone grew serious. Olenna's sharp gaze fixed on her with the weight of decades of experience. But you need to act quickly, she warned. Cersei may be vicious, but she's not stupid. She'll poison that boy's mind against you if you give her the chance, and by the time you're married, it could be too late. Fortunately for you, the dear Queen Regent is rather distracted right now, mourning her precious Joffrey. Accusing Petyr Baelish of his murder, which he didn't commit. But he could have done. Margaery added, frowning. Olenna tilted her head slightly, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. Well, yes, he could have done, he should have done, but he didn't. Margaery's eyes narrowed. You don't know, grandmother. I do know, Olenna interrupted smoothly. You didn't think I'd let you stay married to that beast, did you? If Tyrion had given him the cup, Joffrey would have been dead before the end of the feast. I suppose I should thank whoever finished the job, but rest assured, it wasn't Baelish. Margaery stared at her, the weight of her grandmother's words sinking in like stones. What I don't understand. What are you saying? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Don't trouble yourself with the details, Olenna said softly. The important thing is that Joffrey is gone, and now you have a chance to secure your place as queen. But you need to be quick, clever, and careful. Cersei will come for you eventually. Make sure you're ready when she does. Margaery nodded slowly, the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Olenna smiled, her sharpness softened by affection. Remember, my dear, this is your game now. Play it well, and you'll sit on that throne for the rest of your days. But hesitate for too long, and someone else will. Margaery sat in silence for a moment, her mind racing, heart pounding. For so long, she had wondered how she could navigate the vicious world of King's Landing, how to avoid becoming one of Cersei's casualties. Now, everything was different. Her grandmother had cleared the path for her, but the next steps were hers alone. She looked down at her hands, her fingers absently tracing the edges of the teacup in front of her. And Tommen, she asked finally, lifting her gaze to meet Olenna's once again. What should I do with him? Olenna smiled that same sly, knowing smile. Tommen is a boy. A sweet, innocent boy. He already admires you, and that's a powerful thing. Use it to your advantage. Margaery frowned. She had always been good at charming those around her, but Tommen was different. He was young, impressionable, and most of all, utterly devoted to his mother. Cersei had built her entire life around protecting her children, Tommen would be no exception. I can't just charm him the way I did Joffrey, Margaery murmured. He's just a child. And children soon become men, Olenna replied, sipping her tea. Childish infatuation will turn into adult love. Make that boy obsessed with the idea of you, and then when he's old enough he'll belong to you. Margaery nodded slowly. I can do that. Of course you can, Olenna said, her voice sharp with confidence. You'll make him feel that with you by his side, everything will be alright. That's what he'll crave, a sense of calm in the chaos. Cersei will only provide more chaos. The idea began to take root in Margaery's mind. Tommen wasn't like Joffrey, he wasn't cruel or sadistic. He was a kind boy, one who could be swayed by affection and care. If she played her cards right, she could have Tommen on her side completely, long before Cersei even realized what was happening. And when we're married, Margaery said, her voice growing steadier, I'll be queen. Exactly, Olenna agreed, setting down her cup with a satisfied clink. And with your intelligence, charm, and beauty, you'll be the one ruling the Seven Kingdoms. Not Cersei, not Tywin. You. Underscore 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 underscore. It was late in the afternoon when a sharp knock echoed through the quiet of Margary's chambers. She had been seated by the window, sipping tea and gazing out at the gardens below, lost in thought about the conversation she'd had with her grandmother. The day had been peaceful, but now, something in the air shifted, a tension she couldn't quite place. She rose gracefully from her chair and moved to the door, smoothing her gown as she went. When she opened it, Margaery found herself face to face with two of the most formidable figures in King's Landing, Tywin Lannister, the Hand of the King, and his daughter, Queen Regent Cersei Lannister. Tywin's gaze was as steely and calculating as ever, while Cersei stood beside him, her expression tight and cold, her green eyes flickering with thinly veiled contempt. Lady Tyrell Tywin greeted her, his deep voice calm and commanding. "May we come in?" Margaery kept her face serene, offering a courteous smile, though her mind raced. A visit from both Lannisters was unusual, especially unannounced. Something was at play here, and she needed to tread carefully. "Of course, Lord Hand," Margaery replied smoothly, stepping aside to allow them entry. "It's an honor to have you both." Tywin and Cersei swept into the room like they owned it, their presence immediately filling the space. Tywin moved toward the center of the chamber, his movements deliberate and purposeful. Cersei, on the other hand, seemed to linger near the door for a moment, her eyes scanning the room as if searching for something out of place. Her lips curled slightly, almost as if she was tasting bitterness on her tongue. "Please, make yourselves comfortable," Margaery said, motioning toward a small seating area by the hearth. She kept her voice light, inviting, though she felt the weight of their presence pressing down on her. Tywin settled into one of the chairs, his posture as rigid and controlled as ever. Cersei sat beside him, crossing her arms, her gaze flicking to Margaery with a sharpness that felt like a silent accusation. Margaery knew the animosity between them had only deepened since Joffrey's death, but she wasn't about to let Cersei's icy demeanor unnerve her. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this visit?" Margaery asked, taking her seat opposite them. She kept her expression open and polite, though inside, her mind was working quickly, trying to anticipate their intentions. Tywin wasted no time, as was his custom. "There are matters that need addressing, Lady Tyrell, concerning the future of the realm and your place within it." Margaery's brows lifted slightly in a show of mild curiosity. "Of course, my lord. I am eager to do whatever is best for the realm." Tywin inclined his head, his pale green eyes studying her closely. "Good. It's no secret that King Tommen will soon require a queen," he said, his voice measured. "And given the tragic events at Joffrey's wedding, it's in the best interests of both the Crown and House Tyrell to move forward with a new union, one that will secure stability for the kingdom." Margaery nodded, understanding where this was leading. She had expected the marriage to Tommen to be discussed, but not quite so soon. "I would be honored to serve the realm as Tommen's queen," she said softly, with the perfect blend of humility and strength, "as I was to serve as Joffrey's. I loved the king and I miss him every day." Beside Tywin, Cersei stiffened, her fingers digging into the arms of her chair. "A queen is not what Tommen needs right now," she said under her breath. "He needs his mother." Cersei, Tywin interrupted, his voice low but firm. "Tommen is the king now. And a king needs a wife. It is not a matter of choice, but of duty." Cersei shot him a glare, her eyes burning with frustration. But she held her tongue, her lips pressing into a thin line as she looked away, her anger barely contained. Margaery watched the exchange, careful to keep her face neutral. She knew that this conversation wasn't just about the marriage, it was about power. Cersei didn't want to lose her influence over Tommen, and Margaery was the threat standing in her way. But Tywin, ever the pragmatist, saw the marriage as a necessary political move, one that would solidify the Lannister-Tyrell alliance and secure Tommen's reign. "I understand your concerns, Your Grace," Margaery said gently, addressing Cersei directly for the first time. "Tommen is young, and he will always need his mother. I would never seek to replace you in his life." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But I believe I can offer him something different: companionship, guidance, and support as he grows into the man he is destined to become." Cersei's gaze snapped back to her, her eyes narrowing. "And what would you know about guiding a king?" she sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. "You have no idea what it takes to rule." Margaery met her gaze evenly, refusing to be cowed by Cersea's hostility. I know that ruling requires wisdom, patience, and understanding. Qualities I have learned from my family and will continue to cultivate. But I also know that Tommen deserves to have people around him who care for him, not just as a king, but as a person. Tywine, who had been watching the exchange with an unreadable expression, finally spoke again. This is not a debate, Cersei. The decision has been made. Lady Margaery will marry Tommen, and the arrangements will be made swiftly. The realm cannot afford any further delay. Cersei's knuckles whitened as she gripped the armrests, but she remained silent, her fury simmering beneath the surface. Margaery allowed herself a small, inward sigh of relief. Tywine had effectively silenced Cersei's objections for now, but she knew this was only the beginning. Cersei wouldn't give up so easily, and the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. Still, Margaery was prepared. She had the support of the most powerful man in the kingdom, and soon, she would have the crown. I am grateful for your confidence, my lord, Margaery said, her tone sincere. I will do everything in my power to be a good queen to Tommen and to ensure the stability of the realm. Tywine nodded, his expression unwavering. I expect nothing less, he said firmly. The marriage will take place immediately after Baelish's trial. It will be small, simple, and most importantly, quick. Margaery held her breath, feeling the weight of Tywine's words settle over the room like a heavy mantle. She knew the urgency behind the decision but hadn't expected it to be quite so swift. Even so, she kept her composure, her face a picture of calm and grace. Cersei, however, was not as controlled. She leaned forward, her voice tight with barely concealed frustration. Tommen is but 10 and 2, she snapped. We can wait a few years, surely. Let him grow, let him. We cannot wait at all, Tywine interrupted, his voice cutting through Cersei's objection with cold finality. Do you know there's a girl in Essos who would claim the throne as her own? She has the right name, the right bloodline, and 3 dragons at her back. 3 dragons. What do you think happens when she decides she's ready to come home, to claim what she believes is hers? Margaery's heart skipped a beat at Tywine's words. She had heard the whispers of Daenerys Targaryen, the last surviving child of the Mad King, gathering her strength across the narrow sea. But hearing Tywine speak of it so plainly, with such grave urgency, brought the threat into sharper focus. Dragons. The stuff of legends, the fiery beasts that had forged the Iron Throne. And they were real. Cersei's face paled, her lips thinning as she absorbed the gravity of Tywine's warning. But her defiance didn't waver. Tommen is still a child, she insisted, her voice trembling with both anger and fear. What good will a rushed marriage do if he's too young to? When that girl crosses the narrow sea, we will not have time to prepare, Tywine said, his tone growing colder with every word. We will need a united front, alliances that are already in place, families that are already tied together by blood. Tommen will marry Lady Tyrell, and as soon as he is old enough, he will put a babe in her. An heir. That is what the realm needs. Stability. Continuity. He glanced at Margaery then, his calculating gaze taking her in, as if weighing her against the challenges to come. She met his eyes, her own resolve hardening. She knew what was expected of her now, not just as a wife, but as a queen. And if the future was as dangerous as Tywine believed, she would need to be prepared. Tommen's youth will not be an issue, Tywine continued, turning back to Cersei, his voice brooking no argument. The marriage will be symbolic for now. But once he comes of age, he will fulfill his duties as king. And he will secure the crown through his heirs. Cersei's jaw clenched. She knew she was losing this battle, her resistance crumbling under the weight of Tywine's iron will. But Margaery could see the flicker of anger still burning in the Queen Regent's eyes. Cersei wasn't just fighting for Tommen, she was fighting for her own place in this world, for her grip on power. And she wasn't going to let go without a fight. And you think a marriage will be enough to stop this Targaryen girl? Cersei asked, her voice biting. You think she'll care about some alliance with the Tyrells when she has dragons at her command? Tywine's expression darkened. Dragons or not, we will meet her with the full strength of the crown. And that includes the Tyrells. Their gold, their armies, their loyalty. That is how we will stop her. Margaery felt the weight of those words sink in. This marriage wasn't just a union between her and Tommen, it was a line of defense against the chaos threatening to engulf Westeros. And she would play her part, as she always had, navigating the treacherous waters of power with grace and cunning. Cersei rose from her seat, her eyes flashing with barely contained fury. "You would sell my son's future for a war that may never come," she spat, her voice trembling. "You would risk everything." "I am ensuring his future," Tywin snapped, his patience wearing thin. "And the future of this kingdom. You may not like it, Cersei, but you will accept it. Tommen will marry Lady Tyrell, and that is final." Cersei's hands trembled, but she said nothing more. She simply turned on her heel, her skirts swirling behind her as she stormed toward the door. "Do what you must," she threw over her shoulder, her voice cold. "But don't think for a moment that I will let you control my son." With that, she was gone, leaving a thick silence in her wake. Margaery exhaled slowly, her gaze shifting from the door to Tywin. The tension in the room lingered, like the crackle of a storm that had yet to break. Tywin stood, smoothing the front of his tunic with an air of finality. "Do not let Cersei's behavior concern you, Lady Margaery," he said, his voice calm once more. "She will come around. In the end, she knows what is best for her son." Margaery nodded, her smile faint but resolute. "I trust your wisdom, Lord Hand. I will do everything within my power to ensure a smooth transition for Tommen and for the realm." Tywin gave a short, approving nod. "Good. We will begin preparations at once." As he left her chambers, Margaery remained seated, her mind racing. The path ahead was becoming clearer, but also more dangerous. Dragons, trials, another wedding, it was all happening so quickly. But Margaery Tyrell was no stranger to swift changes. She had survived the fall of Renly Baratheon, maneuvered her way into the heart of the Lannister court, and now stood on the brink of becoming queen once again. This was just another step in the game she was born to play. And if Tywin was right, if there truly was a Targaryen girl with dragons, then Margaery would need to secure her place on the throne sooner rather than later. She glanced toward the door where Cersei had vanished. The Queen Regent was a formidable enemy, but she was also unraveling. Grief, rage, and desperation were taking their toll on Cersei, and Margaery would use that to her advantage. But the game was not yet won, and Margaery knew she would have to tread carefully. One wrong move, one misplaced trust, and everything she had worked for could crumble. But for now, she smiled to herself, a quiet determination settling within her. Soon, she would be Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. And when the time came, she would prove that she was more than capable of holding that title. Chapter 45, Songs of 4. Chapter text. Songs of 4. Casterly Rock was unlike anything Sansa Stark had ever imagined. The ancient seat of House Lannister loomed high over the crashing waves of the Sunset Sea, its golden stone glinting in the fading light. Perched atop a massive cliff, the fortress seemed as if it defied nature itself, clinging precariously to the rock face. From a distance, Sansa had almost thought it was on the verge of tumbling into the churning waters below. The towering structure appeared more like a natural extension of the mountain than a castle built by men. After nearly 6 grueling weeks on the road from King's Landing, Sansa was immensely relieved to finally arrive. The long journey had been exhausting, days spent bouncing in the confined space of the litter, with little more to do than watch the dusty road pass by. The stifling heat inside the enclosed carriage had been unbearable at times, and the constant creaking of the wheels felt as though it would drive her mad. Now, as the cool sea breeze brushed against her face, Sansa breathed deeply, savoring the crisp air. It was invigorating, a stark contrast to the heavy, oppressive atmosphere of King's Landing. She could hear the roar of the ocean below, a distant but steady sound that filled the air around her, reminding her of the vast world beyond the walls of Casterly Rock. As they made their way through the outer gates and into the courtyard, Sansa marveled at the size of the keep. Its walls seemed to rise endlessly, carved directly from the mountain itself. Though she had seen grand castles before, Winterfell, the Red Keep, there was something about Casterly Rock that was different. It felt ancient, powerful, and imposing in a way that even the Red Keep could not match. For a brief moment, she found herself wondering how many secrets were hidden within its towering walls, how many generations of Lannisters had lived and died here, how many battles had been fought for control of this formidable stronghold. The thought made her shiver slightly, despite the warm sun overhead. Sansa cast a glance over her shoulder at the winding road that had brought her here. The journey had been long, but now, standing in the shadow of Casterly Rock, she felt a strange sense of anticipation. This place, as intimidating as it was, marked a new chapter in her life, a place where she would have to tread carefully, but perhaps where she might also find a measure of control over her destiny. Tyrion led Sansa through the grand entrance of Casterly Rock and into the vast, echoing Great Hall. The air smelled of salt from the sea below, mingling with the scent of burning logs in the massive hearth. Sansa couldn't help but feel a strange sense of finality as she took in her surroundings. The towering stone walls, the looming presence of the cliffs outside, it was all so imposing, yet this was to be her home now, her child's home. She had made her peace with that. As they crossed the hall, Kevan Lannister approached them with a measured, composed stride. Uncle Tyrion greeted with a nod. Nephew Kevan returned, his voice as steady as his expression. He then turned to Sansa, inclining his head slightly in a gesture of respect. "My lady," he said, "congratulations on your news. I'm sure it brings you great joy." Sansa studied Kevan's face as he spoke. There was a civility in his tone, one that lacked the cold, calculated demeanor of Tywin, but she could still sense the Lannister edge beneath it. Kevan was more restrained, more tempered than his brother, but there was always an undercurrent of something unreadable in his manner. She smiled politely, though inside she couldn't quite tell if his congratulations were heartfelt or just another formality. "I haven't been here long myself," Kevan continued, his eyes shifting between them, "perhaps a few weeks. Your father thought it best that I remain to assist you both in settling in. Casterly Rock can be overwhelming at first." "Overwhelming indeed," Tyrion said dryly, though his gaze softened as it flicked towards Sansa. Kevan glanced around the hall, his posture slightly stiff. "You'll find that things run smoothly enough here, though there are matters that will require attention soon. The people will want to know their new lady. And, of course, with your child on the way." He trailed off, offering a tight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Sansa's fingers instinctively tightened around the fabric of her gown, her other hand still resting protectively over her stomach. The thought of meeting the people of Lannisport, of presenting herself as their new lady, felt daunting. The coldness of the place, the sheer cliffs, the sharp wind that blew in from the sea, mirrored the tension she felt inside. Still, she kept her expression calm, her posture regal. She had been raised to survive in courts like these, and she would not falter now. Tyrion, sensing her unease, placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "We'll take things slowly," he said softly, though his words were for her alone. "There's no rush." Kevan, ever observant, gave a slight nod as if he had heard Tyrion's reassurance and approved of it. "The Rock is a place that requires patience, my lady," he said, his voice almost kind, but still edged with that Lannister steel. "But once the people know you, they will accept you. They respect strength, and I have no doubt that you possess it." Sansa smiled faintly, but inside, the words stung. Strength. That was what the Lannisters valued, and it was what she had learned to cultivate during her time in King's Landing. Kevan cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "If there is anything you need, my lady, do not hesitate to ask. Your comfort is a priority, and we will ensure that you are well cared for." "Thank you, Lord Kevan," Sansa replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil within her. "I appreciate your kindness." Kevan offered a curt nod before excusing himself, leaving Sansa and Tyrion alone in the vast hall. The crackle of the fire was the only sound that filled the space now, casting long shadows across the stone floor. Tyrion turned to her, his eyes filled with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. Sansa hesitated before answering. "I'm adjusting," she said finally. "It's not easy. I never thought I would end up here." "Neither did I," Tyrion admitted, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "But life rarely gives us what we expect, does it?" She smiled faintly, appreciating his attempt at humor, but the weight of everything still pressed down on her. "Casterly Rock is impressive," she said, looking around the hall, her voice distant. But it feels cold. Tyrion's gaze softened. It is, he said quietly. It has always been cold to me as well. Sansa looked at him, her eyes meeting his. For a moment, they shared an unspoken understanding, a bond forged through survival, through enduring the cruelty of the world around them. She had never loved him, not in the way a wife might love a husband, but she had come to respect him. And here, in this foreign, imposing place, he was the only person she could truly rely on. "We'll make it warmer," Tyrion said, his tone soft but determined. "For you, for our child. I promise." Sansa nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. She wanted to believe him, to believe that this place could become a home, that she could find some semblance of peace here. But it was difficult to let go of the past, of the pain and loss that had followed her since she had left Winterfell. Together, they began to walk toward the towering windows at the far end of the hall. From there, they could see the endless expanse of the sunset sea, the waves crashing against the jagged rocks below. The view was breathtaking, yet ominous. The sea seemed to stretch on forever, as vast and unpredictable as the future that lay before them. "You'll grow to love it here," Tyrion said after a moment, his eyes on the horizon. "It may not be Winterfell, but it can still be a home for you. For us." Sansa glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. "Perhaps," she said softly. "But I will always carry Winterfell with me." Tyrion nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind her words. "And so you should," he replied. "The North will always be a part of you, no matter where you are. But you'll need to find strength here too, if we're to build a future for our child." Sansa's hand instinctively moved to her belly again, her thoughts turning to the child growing inside her. A symbol of both her past and her future. Could she raise a child in this place, surrounded by the cold stone walls of Casterly Rock? Could she ever truly feel safe here, or would the shadows of the past continue to haunt her? As she stood there, gazing out at the endless sea, Sansa silently resolved that she would not let her child grow up in fear. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dangers still lingered, she would face them with the same strength she had always found within herself. For her child, she would make Casterly Rock a home. ___________. It was late in the evening when Sansa decided to explore the keep. Tyrion had left her alone to get settled in the ladies' chambers, giving her space to adjust. She had never truly imagined what it would be like to live in Casterly Rock, but now that she was here, she felt a strange mix of awe and isolation. The chambers were grand, far grander than anything she'd known in Winterfell. Her mother had always shared a room with her father, and those chambers, though large, had felt lived in, warm, and personal. This, by contrast, felt cold despite its opulence, as though the grandeur served to remind her of her new life rather than comfort her in it. Everywhere she turned, the Lannister banner seemed to loom, its crimson and gold vibrant and oppressive at the same time. The lion's snarling visage was stitched onto the tapestries, the cushions, even embroidered into the drapery that framed the high windows. For a moment, Sansa's throat tightened, and she had to stop herself from asking the servants to remove them. But she hesitated, reminding herself that this was her sigil now. It represented her family, her husband, her child growing within her. She was Lady Lannister now, in name and station, and she would be expected to live up to that title, to bear it proudly. Still, every time her eyes caught sight of the lion, her mind flickered back to King's Landing, to the Red Keep. She saw the banners draped behind the Iron Throne, and, worse, she saw Joffrey seated beneath them, his sneer ever present. He had never been a true Lannister by name, but in every way that mattered, he had carried their influence, their cruelty. The shadow of him seemed to cling to the sigil, a spectre that haunted her even here, far from King's Landing. She shook her head, trying to dispel the memory, but his face lingered in her mind's eye, and she felt a shiver run down her spine. How had it come to this? How had she gone from the daughter of Winterfell to the wife of a Lannister, with the very sigil that once struck fear in her heart now draped around her? Sansa moved from room to room, her footsteps echoing softly on the stone floors as she explored the vast chambers of her new home. The keep was labyrinthine, with its twisting halls and shadowed corridors, and she soon found herself in unfamiliar territory, far from her chambers. The quiet was unsettling, broken only by the occasional flicker of a torch in its sconce or the distant sound of the sea crashing against the cliffs below. She wandered aimlessly, her thoughts tangled with memories of Winterfell and the people she had lost. At one point, she paused at a window, looking out over the sea. The waves roared against the rocks, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine that she was back in the north, that she was safe and free from the weight of Lannister expectations. But the cold reality returned as quickly as it had left. Winterfell was gone, and she was here, alone. At last, she came upon a door that intrigued her. Pushing it open, she stepped into a vast library, far larger than any she had ever seen. The smell of old parchment and leather greeted her, a strangely comforting scent that reminded her of Maester Luwin's study back in Winterfell. Towering bookshelves stretched up towards the high ceilings, filled with books, scrolls, and tomes that reached well beyond her grasp. In the center of the room, illuminated by the soft glow of a few candles, sat Tyrion. He was hunched over a desk, stacks of papers and books piled around him, his attention focused on whatever task lay before him. He didn't seem to notice her entrance at first, lost in his work. Sansa lingered in the doorway, watching him for a moment. There was something calming about seeing him here, surrounded by knowledge, far removed from the vicious court of King's Landing. For the first time since they had arrived, she felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find some semblance of peace here. She stepped further into the room, her soft footsteps finally catching his attention. Tyrion looked up, surprised but not displeased to see her. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, setting down his quill and leaning back slightly in his chair. Sansa shook her head, offering a small smile. "I wanted to explore this place, it's so vast. I could spend weeks wandering and still not see everything." Tyrion chuckled softly. "A bit overwhelming, isn't it? Casterly Rock has a way of making even the most seasoned travelers feel small." She walked toward him, her fingers brushing along the spines of the old books as she passed. "I thought I might find you here," she said quietly. "The library at Winterfell was much smaller than this, though I never was a reader." He smiled at that, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "You'll find this one well stocked, though perhaps not with the same memories." Sansa stopped beside his desk, glancing at the open ledger before him. "What are you working on?" she asked, genuinely curious. "House business," Tyrion replied with a tired sigh. "Balancing the accounts, making sure the mines are running smoothly, and reviewing the land holdings. My father's left quite a legacy to manage." Sansa looked at him, really looked at him, his weariness, the way the light flickered in his mismatched eyes, the burden that sat heavily on his small shoulders. For all his wit and sharp tongue, Tyrion carried his own weight of expectations, of duty. And in this moment, she realized how much they were alike in that regard. Both of them, trapped in roles they hadn't chosen, doing what they could to survive. "I didn't mean to disturb you," she said softly. "You're never a disturbance," Tyrion replied, his voice gentler than she'd expected. "Besides, I could use the company. It's been a long day." Sansa hesitated for a moment, then pulled out a chair and sat across from him, her hands resting in her lap. She looked around the library once more, her thoughts wandering. "I hope our child grows up with a love for books," she said, almost to herself. "That they find peace in stories the way you do." Tyrion smiled faintly, his gaze softening as he followed her line of thought. "I have no doubt they will," he said, his tone warm. "And I'll make sure they have every book in this library at their disposal." For a moment, they sat in silence, surrounded by the quiet wisdom of centuries contained within the shelves. In this small, dimly lit room, away from the chaos and expectations of the world outside, Sansa felt a glimmer of contentment. It wasn't Winterfell, and it never would be, but perhaps, in time, it could still be a home. "Right," Tyrion said, rising from his chair. "I'll find the cook and ask her to prepare you a nice tea. Something soothing, to help you sleep." As he passed by, he gave her hand a gentle squeeze, a gesture that had grown more familiar between them in recent weeks. It wasn't quite affection, but it was something. A tentative understanding, a shared solace in the midst of their shared circumstances. "Thank you," Tyrion, Sansa replied softly, watching as he made his way toward the door. Once alone, she stood still for a moment, her gaze drifting over the vast shelves of books surrounding her. She let her fingers trace the spines, feeling the rough, worn edges of the ancient tomes. Many were histories, of the kings and queens of Westeros, the rise and fall of the Targaryens, and before them, the age of heroes. The stories she had once dreamed of, stories where she imagined herself a princess in a fairy tale, now felt distant, almost mocking in their grandeur. Her eyes then fell upon the desk where Tyrion had been working, a clutter of papers and books scattered across its surface. With a quiet sigh, Sansa moved to tidy the mess, aligning the scrolls and letters into neat piles. But as she reached for the topmost letter, her hand froze. The words leaped out at her, unbidden, and despite herself, she began to read. She would be a good queen. Come to Meereen and meet her. Sansa's breath caught in her throat. She is what the realm needs. Her heart pounded in her chest as she read those words again, her mind racing. Meereen. A queen. Could they be speaking of her? The girl whispered about in rumors, the one with dragons who had escaped across the sea. Daenerys Targaryen. Why would Tyrion be receiving letters about her? Was he involved in some plot she didn't know about? Sansa carefully set the letter back down where she had found it, her hands trembling slightly. She stepped back from the desk, her mind swirling with questions. Who had sent this letter? Why had Tyrion not mentioned anything? Suddenly, the walls of the library felt too close, the air too thick. She turned and made her way back to the window, looking out over the dark, sprawling cliffs of Casterly Rock, the sound of the waves crashing below a steady rhythm in the night. Her home, her child's future, lay within these walls now, but still, she felt a strange pull, a whisper of something bigger happening beyond this place. Tyrion returned soon after with a small tray and a pot of tea, the smell of herbs filling the air. Here, he said, pouring her a cup. It's chamomile and valerian root. It should help calm your nerves. Sansa took the cup with a polite smile, but her mind remained on the letter. As Tyrion settled back at his desk, seemingly unaware of her discovery, she sipped her tea, her thoughts a whirlwind of uncertainty. The world around them was changing, again. And for the first time in a long while, Sansa wasn't sure where she fit into it. But one thing was clear, Tyrion knew more than he was letting on, and whatever was happening across the sea, it was coming for them all. Chapter 46, Roslyn 18. Chapter text. Roslyn 18. Roslyn sat quietly in front of the fire in her chambers, cradling Torrhen in her arms as a gaggle of young free girls burst into the room. Their laughter and chatter filled the space, momentarily lifting the heavy quiet that often lingered in the keep. These girls, sisters, nieces, great-nieces, and even great-great-nieces of House Free, had descended on Riverrun for Alex's wedding, and their youthful energy was contagious, even for Roslyn. Perra, a sweet girl of only 5, and the granddaughter of Roslyn's nephew Ryman, was the first to speak up. Her big brown eyes gleamed with excitement as she peered up at the baby in Roslyn's arms. "He's so cute," she cooed, her curly brown hair bouncing around her pinched little face as she leaned closer. "He looks like Lord Stark," declared White Walder, the daughter of Rhaegar Free, one of Roslyn's father's many grandsons. Walder was nearing 10, with long, flowing white blonde hair that had earned her the affectionate nickname. Her sharp eyes studied Torrhen with all the seriousness of a child determined to sound wise beyond her years. Zia Free, another of Walder Free's many great-granddaughters, tilted her head and grinned. "No, he looks like Ro," she said, her voice soft but confident. Zia was nearly 15, with sweet features that masked the fact that she was likely next in line for a suitable match. Roslyn knew this wedding would be one of many opportunities for her father to start bargaining over the futures of his granddaughters. Roslyn watched the girls with a quiet smile as they debated, their youthful voices rising and falling as they compared Torrhen's features to various family members. She couldn't help but marvel at how easily they filled the room with light and life. It was a stark contrast to the looming weight of the Free legacy, always lingering in the background, always calculating. "He has his father's eyes," Roslyn said softly, stroking Torrhen's auburn hair. The girls fell quiet for a moment, all looking at her as if waiting for her to declare whose likeness Torrhen bore most. She met their expectant faces and smiled gently. "But he'll be his own man one day. A Stark and a Free, and maybe something more than either." The girls nodded solemnly, as if they understood the importance of her words, before launching back into their excited chatter about the upcoming wedding, the gowns, the feast, and the potential suitors that might attend. Rosalind listened, her heart warmed by their innocence, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her son, so small and fragile in her arms now, would one day carry the weight of legacies far heavier than these girls could ever imagine. As the conversation flowed around her, Zia's bright voice cut through the noise. "I hope when I marry one day, they'll love me as much as Rob loves you," she said, her tone wistful yet hopeful. Pera chimed in enthusiastically, "Yes, you're like a princess with her prince." Her words brought a smile to Rosalind's face, a fleeting moment of joy that felt almost surreal amidst the realities of their world. Just then, Torren stirred in her arms, his tiny fingers curling around her thumb. The girls gasped, their focus shifting back to the baby. "He's awake!" Pera squealed, bouncing on her toes with excitement. Rosalind smiled, bringing Torren closer to the girls. "Do you want to hold him?" she asked, her heart warm at the thought of sharing her joy with them. Wilder's eyes widened. "Can I?" she asked, her seriousness forgotten in the face of the baby's innocence. "Of course," Rosalind replied, carefully passing Torren into Wilder's waiting arms. The older girl cradled him carefully, her expression a mixture of awe and pride as she gazed down at the infant. "He's so small!" Wilder exclaimed, her voice barely above a whisper. "He feels so fragile." "Like a little bird," Zia added, her eyes wide with wonder. "You have to be careful with him." As they took turns holding Torren, their laughter and chatter resumed, filling the room with light. Rosalind watched them, her heart swelling with a mix of joy and concern. The innocence of childhood felt so fleeting, so precious. The conversation shifted to the upcoming wedding, with the girls excitedly discussing their own dreams of gowns and dancing. "I want a dress with lots of ribbons," Pera declared, her eyes sparkling. "And maybe some flowers in my hair. I want to dance with a lord." Zia giggled, her imagination taking flight. "But which one? Lord Butterwell? Lord Piper?" Rosalind chuckled, joining in their laughter, but as the conversation wore on, she couldn't shake the feeling that their light-hearted dreams would soon face the complexities of reality. "Alex is going to be such a beautiful bride," Ryla said softly, her voice barely rising above the crackle of the fire. Ryla had always been one of the quieter girls, shy and delicate in her manner. Rosalind marveled at how much she had grown. When Rosalind had last seen her, Ryla had been little more than a babe, trailing after the older girls with wide eyes. Now, she had blossomed into a proper young lady. Marissa, a spirited niece of 13, nodded eagerly in agreement. "And Lord Tully loves her," she added, her voice full of conviction. "He's waited so long to marry her. It's like a real love story, isn't it?" Rosalind smiled at their excitement, warmth spreading through her as she listened to the girls gush about her niece Alex's upcoming wedding. "Lord Tully will be waiting longer still if you aren't already," a voice interrupted from the doorway. Rosalind turned, her breath catching for a moment as she struggled to place the face before her. For an instant, she didn't recognize the girl standing there. But then, the pieces clicked into place, and a wave of recognition washed over her. It was Alex. The transformation was striking. The anxious but playful girl Rosalind had once known now stood before her as a woman, a bride-to-be, poised and elegant in a way that took Rosalind by surprise. Her dark brown hair was swept up into a loose braid that fell over one shoulder, and her blue eyes gleamed with a mischievous sparkle that hadn't dimmed with time. Alex looked radiant, as though the joy of her impending marriage to Lord Tully had infused her with a glow from within. The room fell silent, the girls' excited chatter replaced by wide-eyed admiration as they took in Alex's appearance. Even Pera, who had been chattering non-stop about gowns and flowers, fell quiet, her eyes round as she stared at the bride-to-be. "Alex!" Rosalind exclaimed, a smile breaking across her face as she rose from her seat. She crossed the room, careful not to jostle Torren, and wrapped her niece in a warm embrace. "I almost didn't recognize you." Alex laughed, a soft, melodious sound that filled the room with its warmth. "I could say the same about you, Rosalind," she teased, pulling back to study her niece's face. "Motherhood suits you." Rosalind blushed slightly, glancing down at Torren, who had settled peacefully in her arms once more. "And being a bride suits you," she replied, her smile softening. "You look stunning." "Not quite a bride yet," Alex said with a playful wink. "But soon enough." The girls, who had been watching in awe, began to murmur amongst themselves, clearly enchanted by Alex's presence. Even Zia, who was usually so confident, looked a little starstruck. "You're going to be the most beautiful bride ever," Ryla said, her quiet voice filled with admiration. Alex turned to the younger girls, her smile warm and genuine. "Thank you, Ryla. I hope I'll live up to your expectations. And Lord Tully must be so excited to marry you." Marissa chimed in, unable to contain her enthusiasm. "He's waited so long, he must love you so much." Alex's expression softened, and for a moment, Roslyn saw something deeper flicker in her sister's eyes, a hint of the love and sacrifice that lay behind the wedding. "He's only waited 9 months," Alex said, chuckling. "He's a good man, and I'm lucky to have him." Roslyn watched her sister closely, sensing the gravity beneath Alex's words. She knew there had been complications with the marriage arrangements, delays, political maneuverings, and the weight of their family's alliances pressing down on Alex's shoulders. But despite it all, here she was, standing tall and radiant, ready to walk into her future with a grace Roslyn admired. But Alex continued, her playful tone returning as she looked around at the gathered girls. "We won't make him wait any longer than he has to, will we?" The girls giggled and shook their heads, their excitement bubbling over once more. "Then off you go," Alex said, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "There's still much to do before the wedding, and you lot are part of it." With that, the girls hurried out of the room, their laughter echoing down the hall as they disappeared. Roslyn chuckled softly, watching them go. She turned back to her niece, her expression softening. "You really do look happy, Alex," she said, her voice quiet but full of affection. Alex's smile faltered just for a moment, but then she nodded. "I am," she said, though her voice carried a weight that didn't quite match her words. "I'll be happy, Roslyn. I'll make it work." Roslyn knew the complexities of love in their world, how marriage was often more about duty than choice, more about securing alliances than following one's heart. But as she looked at Alex, she hoped that, in time, she would find the happiness she deserved, the kind of love that ran deeper than politics and promises. "I know you will," Roslyn said softly, squeezing her hand. There was a deep affection in her eyes, a bond that had always been unspoken between them. "You've always had a way of making the best of things, no matter what." Alex's smile returned, a glimmer of warmth chasing away the hint of uncertainty that had momentarily clouded her expression. "And you, Roslyn," she said, her voice softening as she looked at her niece with fondness. "You've found love too. That much is clear." Roslyn glanced down at Torren, cradled in her arms, his tiny hand clutching at her dress. Her heart swelled as she thought of Rob, of the way he loved her, of the life they had built together despite the odds. "Yes," she whispered, her voice filled with quiet joy. "I have." But then, curiosity stirred within her. It had been so long since she'd been home, and the world of the phrase, with its endless plots and alliances, had continued without her. "But tell me," Roslyn said, looking back at Alex, "what have I missed? What's been happening at home since I left?" Alex sighed, as if unsure where to begin. "Well, where to start," she said with a hint of humor. "Your marriage to Rob has only made Grandfather more determined to secure good matches for the rest of us. It's like a fever, he's more relentless than ever." Roslyn raised an eyebrow, half expecting this. Walder Free had always been eager to secure his family's future through advantageous marriages. "Who's been matched then?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "Amy," Alex began, "has been betrothed to Lancel Lannister. She left for Lannisport just before we came here. Grandfather sees it as a great victory, binding our house to the Lannisters." Roslyn's lips tightened at the mention of the Lannisters, knowing the political weight that came with such a union. "Lancel Lannister," she murmured. "That's unexpected." Alex nodded in agreement, her smile a little thin. "He's not exactly what we'd imagined for Amy, but it's a powerful match. And then there's little B. B has been betrothed to Lord Smallwood's son. It's not quite as grand as the Lannister match, but it will strengthen our alliances with the local lords." Roslyn smiled faintly. Little B, one of their younger cousins, had always been a sweet, quiet girl. The thought of her marrying into House Smallwood seemed fitting, though it tugged at Roslyn's heart to think of another member of their family being tied into political knots. "And of course, you know about Tyter," Alex said, her tone shifting, her eyes glancing at Roslin with something like hesitation. Roslin blinked in surprise. "No," she replied, a frown creasing her brow. "What about her?" Alex hesitated for a moment longer, as if weighing how to deliver the news. "Lady Stark has arranged for Tyter to marry Lord Bolton," she said at last, her voice quiet. "They are due to be wed in a few weeks." Roslin's heart skipped a beat, her mind reeling at the revelation. "Bolton," she repeated, her voice edged with disbelief. "Lord Bolton of the Dread Fort?" Alex nodded, her face reflecting the unease Roslin felt. "Yes, Roose Bolton," she confirmed. "I thought they would have told you by now. The arrangement was made not long after they took Winterfell back from the Greyjoys." Roslin's blood ran cold. The thought of sweet, gentle Tyter being sent to the Dread Fort, bound to a man like Bolton, filled Roslin with a sense of dread. I didn't know," Roslin whispered, her mind racing. "Poor Tyter. Why would they?" Alex's expression softened with sympathy. "It's politics, Roslin," she said quietly. "Grandfather thought it would secure our family's ties to the north, especially with your marriage to Robb. And Lady Stark, well, she has her reasons." Roslin felt a pang of guilt, realizing that her marriage to Robb may have played a part in this arrangement. It wasn't uncommon for alliances to be forged through such unions, but Tyter was so young, so unprepared for the harshness of the world Lord Bolton ruled. "I wish I could help her," Roslin murmured, her heart heavy with worry. "She's too kind for a place like the Dread Fort." Alex placed a comforting hand on her sister's shoulder. "I know. But Tyter is stronger than she looks. She'll need that strength, but I believe she'll find a way through." Roslin nodded, though her chest tightened with concern. The world they lived in was unforgiving, especially for women, whose futures were often decided by the ambitions of men. She could only hope that Tyter, despite the daunting marriage ahead, would find her own path. Alex's voice broke the heavy silence. "Don't worry, Roslin. Tyter will have to make the best of it, just as we all do." Roslin sighed, her fingers tracing the soft fabric of Torrhen's blanket. "I know. But I can't help feeling it's unfair. She deserves better." Alex offered a sad smile. "We all do. But this is the world we live in." Then, with a lighter tone, she added, "Besides, let's not let all this talk of arrangements and politics darken the mood. There's still a wedding to enjoy, and I need you by my side." Roslin managed a small smile, appreciating Alex's attempt to lift her spirits. "Yes," she said softly. "We still have a wedding." And though the worries of their world remained ever present, for a moment, Roslin allowed herself to imagine that the future could still hold hope, even amidst the tangled webs of duty and sacrifice. The September of Riverrun had been transformed into a vision of delicate beauty. Blue roses, vivid and striking, cascaded from every arch and pillar, their soft fragrance filling the air. Bundles of white baby's breath nestled in every corner, creating a dreamlike effect that softened the grandeur of the space. The flowers wove together like a tapestry of life, breathing color and warmth into the ancient stone walls. Sunlight streamed through the tall stained glass windows, casting a rainbow of light across the floor, where the lords and ladies of the Riverlands gathered in anticipation. Roslin stood at the threshold of the September, her heart fluttering in her chest, both from the beauty of the scene and the weight of the occasion. She gripped Robb's arm tightly for balance, her fingers curling around the soft fabric of his sleeve. His steady presence beside her was a comfort, his strength a quiet reassurance. She needed it now more than ever. In her other arm, she cradled Torrhen, his tiny body pressed against her, wrapped in soft linens. The weight of him was a sweet reminder of the life she and Robb had built together, but also an added responsibility on a day already thick with emotion. Robb turned his head slightly, catching her eye with a warm, reassuring smile. "You're doing fine," he murmured softly, his voice barely above a whisper, meant only for her. His hand rested gently over hers, giving it a subtle squeeze. Roslin returned the smile, though her heart still raced. She wasn't nervous for herself, this was Alex's day, after all, but something about the spectacle, the grandeur, made her feel unsteady. Perhaps it was the weight of memories stirred by the familiar surroundings, or the soft, unspoken tension that always seemed to hang in the air when her family gathered. There were so many eyes, so many expectations. Her gaze swept over the crowd in the September, The faces of Freys, Tullys, and their many allies all turned toward the altar where Alex would soon stand. The great families of the Riverlands were here, their banners hanging proudly, their presence a reminder of the delicate balance of power that shaped their world. The blue roses caught her attention once more, their vibrant color standing out against the muted stone. Alex's favorite. Her niece had always loved them, and it seemed fitting that they adorned every corner of the September on this day. For a moment, Rosalind thought back to her own wedding, how different it had been. There had been no roses, no joyous celebration, only a hurried ceremony overshadowed by war. And yet, in that haste, she had found love, unexpected and true. Torrhen stirred in her arms, drawing her out of her thoughts. She adjusted him gently, pressing a soft kiss to his auburn curls. He blinked up at her with his wide, curious eyes, and Rosalind felt her heart swell with affection. The weight of him in her arms was grounding, reminding her of what mattered most. As the soft hum of conversation filled the air, Rosalind glanced at the altar, where the Septon was already preparing for the ceremony. Any moment now, Alex would appear, and the ceremony would begin. Rosalind imagined her niece, radiant and full of joy, walking down the aisle to her future. But as the time ticked on, Rosalind couldn't help but feel the weight of the many futures that were being written today. Not just Alex's, but her own, Torrhen's, and even her family's. There was something fragile about this moment, something that felt like a turning point. The alliances, the marriages, they were more than just unions of hearts, they were unions of power, of legacies. And those legacies rested, in part, on her son's small shoulders. She tightened her hold on Rob's arm, the steady beat of his heart beneath her touch offering comfort. For now, they had each other, and they had this life they had built, this family. And for today, that was enough. As the doors at the far end of the September creaked open, signaling Alex's arrival, the gathered crowd hushed, their whispers falling away like leaves in the wind. Rosalind's breath caught, and she leaned slightly against Rob, her heart full as she watched her sister take her first steps toward the future. Rob's arm tightened protectively around her, his presence grounding her in the sea of emotions that swirled within the sacred space. Together, they stood, husband and wife, mother and father, watching as love, duty, and legacy entwined once more before them. Alex glided down the aisle like a vision out of a fairy tale, her gown shimmering in the soft candlelight. The dress was a masterpiece, an elegant, flowing white creation adorned with intricate gold trim that gleamed with every step she took. The veil cascading from her head trailed behind her for several yards, a river of delicate lace that rippled as she moved, adding to the regal air she carried. In that moment, Alex looked more like a queen than the future wife of a lord, though the Lord of Riverrun was no ordinary man. It was clear to everyone that their father, Walder Free, had spared no expense for this wedding, determined to make it as grand as any noble celebration. Rosalind stood near the front, watching her niece with a soft smile. Alex was radiant, her cheeks flushed with joy, her eyes shining with anticipation. The whole scene was breathtaking, and Rosalind felt a small flutter of emotion in her chest. This was the wedding they had all dreamed of, the kind of grand, magnificent affair that many young girls fantasized about. For a fleeting moment, Rosalind thought of her own wedding, so different from this. Hers had been hastily arranged, a rushed ceremony in her mother's old dress, with only a few family members in attendance. No elaborate decorations, no flowing veils, just vows spoken quickly in a bare September. But as she thought of that day, she didn't feel a pang of jealousy, only a quiet contentment. Her wedding had been exactly what she needed. She hadn't married Rob for love, but now it's all she knew, Rob's love, and no amount of flowers or grandeur could have made that moment more meaningful. Rosalind glanced at Rob, standing tall beside her with Torrhen nestled in her arms, and her heart swelled. Her life was far from perfect, but it was hers. It was full of love, family, and quiet joys that no ceremony could ever surpass. As Alex made her way down the aisle, she was escorted by Alex's father, Simond Free, Rosalind's much older half-brother. Simond, a man over 30 years Rosalind's senior, had always struck an imposing figure in their childhood. His slight frame and sharp features were a mirror image of their father, more so than any of her other brothers, and he carried the same air of authority, though without the cold ruthlessness that had made Walder Free infamous. There was something softer in Simond, something protective. Rosalind had always sensed his fierce devotion to Alex, a bond stronger than most Freys shared with their children. Simon's steps were slow and measured as he guided Alex down the aisle, his hand resting lightly on her arm. His face was set in a rare expression of emotion, the weight of the moment clearly affecting him. His normally sharp eyes were softened, almost misty, as if the act of giving Alex away to another man stirred feelings he wasn't entirely prepared for. He had always been her protector, her guardian in many ways, and now he was leading her toward a new life, a life that would no longer need his shield. Rosalind couldn't help but smile as she watched them. Simond had always been proud, stoic even, but today, he was undeniably moved. He glanced at Alex from time to time as they walked, as if he wanted to memorize this moment, the last time she would walk beside him as a free. Alex, for her part, walked with grace and poise, though her eyes were bright with emotion. She held her head high, her veil trailing behind her like a banner of victory, and yet there was a softness to her steps, a vulnerability that only her family could see. Rosalind knew that behind the veil and the beauty, Alex was likely feeling the weight of her new future, the unknowns of marriage, and the inevitable changes that came with it. But there was no doubt that she was ready, more than ready, for this moment. As Alex and Simond reached the altar, Rosalind caught her niece's eye for a brief second, and they shared a look that needed no words. It was a look of understanding, of shared history, of love. They had both walked paths that led them to new lives, different from what they had known, but each had found her way, each had found her own happiness. Rosalind's gaze shifted to Lord Edmure Tully, who stood waiting at the altar. His face was full of quiet admiration as he watched Alex approach, his love for her clear in the soft smile that played on his lips. He had waited for her, patiently, for so long, and now, at last, she was his. As the septon began the ceremony, Rosalind leaned into Rob's side, feeling the warmth of his presence and the gentle weight of Torren in her arms. The future stretched out before them all, uncertain but full of possibility. Alex was stepping into a new chapter, one filled with hope and promise, and Rosalind couldn't have been happier for her. The feast that followed the ceremony was a grand affair, one that could easily rival the splendor of the royal wedding. The great hall of Riverrun had been transformed into a lively celebration, adorned with banners of the Free and Tully houses, and illuminated by the warm glow of countless candles. Tables groaned under the weight of lavish dishes, roasted meats, sweet fruits, and delicate pastries, all served on silver platters, while goblets overflowed with rich red wine. The music of fiddles, lutes, and drums filled the air, setting a merry rhythm that seemed to breathe life into the room itself. The Free girls, all dressed in their finest gowns, had taken to the dance floor with gleeful abandon. Their laughter and excitement were infectious, and they wasted no time in gathering as many lords and lordlings as they could to join them in the lively reels. The girls tugged at sleeves and whispered teasing encouragements, their eyes sparkling with mischief as they coaxed even the most reluctant of young men onto the dance floor. Soon, the hall was a swirl of color and movement, with lords' sons spinning in clumsy circles beside the more practiced dancers. At the center of it all were Alex and Edmure, the newlywed couple who had barely sat down since the feast began. They danced to song after song, moving with a natural ease that spoke of their growing affection for one another. Alex, radiant in her wedding gown, was a picture of joy. Her laughter filled the hall, bright and carefree, as Edmure spun her around the floor, sometimes making exaggerated movements that had her giggling uncontrollably. Rosalind, seated with Rob at the high table, watched her niece with a warm smile. Alex's happiness was contagious, and it was clear to anyone watching that she had found something true in Edmure. They whispered to each other as they danced, sharing private jokes, and every now and then, Alex would throw her head back in laughter at some silly remark Edmure had made. Edmure, for his part, seemed utterly enchanted by his bride. He never left her side, his attention entirely on her, as if the entire hall and all its guests had disappeared, and they were the only two people in the world. His smile was constant, a reflection of his deep affection for her. Rosalind could see the admiration in his eyes every time he looked at Alex, a man who had waited so long for this moment and now reveled in every second of it. The music changed, shifting from a lively tune to a slower, more intimate melody. The crowd thinned slightly as some of the more boisterous dancers took a break, but Alex and Edmure remained, swaying gently together in the center of the hall. They moved in perfect harmony, their heads close as they spoke in soft whispers, sharing a world of their own amidst the revelry. Rosalind leaned into Rob's shoulder, feeling the steady warmth of his presence, the weight of Torren secure in her arms. In moments like this, surrounded by love and family, she allowed herself to imagine that this was how her life would be from now on, peaceful, whole, untouched by the darkness that had once threatened to consume it. Maybe her past mistakes would be forgiven. Perhaps Tywin Lannister and Queen Cersei would let the memory of Joffrey's death fade, leaving her to live out her days in quiet contentment, far from their reach. But as the thought passed through her mind, she felt a familiar tightness in her chest. Maybe she was being naive, foolish to hope for such things. The world wasn't so kind, and those who held power were rarely forgiving. Still, in the warmth of this moment, with her family close and the whole alive with laughter and joy, it was easy to let herself believe in that possibility, even if just for a little while. The music picked up again, bright and lively, drawing more people to the dance floor. Rosalind smiled as she watched the three girls twirling in their colorful gowns, their laughter ringing through the hall. The festive energy was infectious, and for a moment, she allowed herself to be swept up in it. Suddenly, Hera came bounding over to their table, her curly brown hair bouncing with every step. Without a hint of anxiety or hesitation, she leaned over the table, her bright eyes fixed on Robb. "Robb," she called out, her small hands gripping the edge of the table as she peered up at him with hopeful excitement. "Will you dance with me? Father says he's tired." Rosalind's eyes flicked to where Pettifree, Hera's father, sat at one of the nearby tables. His face was flushed, sweat dripping down his brow, clearly worn out from the festivities. He waved weakly in their direction, a sheepish grin on his face as he dabbed at his forehead with a handkerchief. Robb let out a hearty laugh, his blue eyes twinkling with amusement. "Of course, my sweet Hera," he said, pushing back his chair as he rose to his feet. "It would be my pleasure." Hera's face lit up with delight, and she clapped her hands before extending one toward Robb. He took it with a mock-serious bow, and Rosalind couldn't help but smile at the sight. Robb had a way of making people feel special, especially children, and Hera looked as if her wildest dream had just come true. As Robb led Hera to the dance floor, Rosalind watched them fondly. Hera giggled as Robb lifted her with ease, twirling her around to the lively beat. The other three girls quickly gathered around them, some joining in the dance, others watching with wide-eyed admiration. It was a moment of pure innocence, untainted by the weight of the world outside these walls, and Rosalind was grateful for it. Rosalind was so caught up in watching Robb and Hera dance, her heart lightened by the innocent joy on their faces, that she didn't notice when her father, Lord Walder Frey, quietly sat down beside her. His presence was sudden, breaking through the warmth of the moment like a cold breeze. "Are you not dancing?" he asked, his voice gruff but edged with a curious tone. "You always loved to dance." Rosalind turned to him, her expression tightening, her guard rising instinctively. "Is that so, father?" she replied, her voice clipped. "How would you know?" Walder didn't seem fazed by her sharp tone, only glanced down at Torrhen, who slept peacefully in her arms. "He's so bonny, your boy," he said, his gnarled fingers reaching out to gently play with Torrhen's tiny hand. For a moment, Rosalind was struck by the contrast between her father's frail, weathered hands and her son's soft, untouched skin. It was a fleeting tenderness from a man she had long known to be harsh and calculating. "You've done well with him," Walder continued, his sharp eyes flicking over to where Robb still danced with Hera. "And with him," he added, gesturing vaguely in Robb's direction. "I knew he'd like you, of course, but he's besotted with you, isn't he?" A thin smile curled on his lips, something between amusement and grudging admiration. "I underestimated you, daughter." Rosalind stiffened at his words, her mind racing. Walder Frey was not a man known for offering compliments freely, and certainly not without reason. His approval, when it came, was rarely without some hidden agenda. She had grown up knowing that affection and praise from her father often came with strings attached, a lesson learned from years spent watching him manipulate his children and grandchildren like pieces on a board. "I've not done anything with him," Rosalind said quietly, her voice steady as she held her father's gaze. "He simply loved me, and I him." Walder's lips twisted into a cynical smirk. "Love," he scoffed, shaking his head as if the very word was foreign to him. "Love doesn't win wars, girl. But I suppose it doesn't hurt if it comes along with power and a good alliance." He glanced back at Robb again, watching him with an appraising eye. "You've secured yourself well, Rosalind." Robb Stark's a fine man, noble, strong, and he's made you Lady of Winterfell, no less. It's more than I ever expected. Roslyn felt a flicker of anger rise in her chest. Her marriage, her love for Robb, was more than a transaction. But she knew better than to argue with her father, a man whose entire life had been built on bargaining, deals, and alliances. To him, everything was an exchange of value, love included. "I'm not the child you once knew," Roslyn said softly but firmly, her voice laced with a quiet strength. "I have my own life now, my own family. And I don't need to prove anything to you." Walder's eyes narrowed, his smile fading. For a brief moment, there was something unreadable in his gaze, perhaps a flicker of recognition that his daughter had grown beyond his control, beyond his reach. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by his usual calculating demeanor. "Maybe not," he muttered, leaning back in his chair with a sigh. "But don't forget where you came from. You're still a Free, and one day, this boy," he tapped Torrhen's hand again, "will carry both the Stark and Free names. Legacies are long, Roslyn. Don't be too quick to think you've escaped yours." Roslyn looked down at her sleeping son, feeling the weight of her father's words, but she refused to let them settle in her heart. Torrhen would carry both names, yes, but she would make sure that the Stark name, with all its honor, love, and strength, defined his future. Not the cold, grasping legacy of House Free. "I know where I come from, Father," Roslyn said, her voice calm but firm. "And I know where I'm going. My son's future will be brighter than what you've planned." Walder grunted, clearly unmoved by Roslyn's quiet defiance. "We'll see," he muttered, rising slowly from his seat, his old joints creaking with the effort. As he stood, he gave her one last look, a sharp, calculating gaze that carried the weight of decades of manipulation and control. "You've surprised me, Roslyn," he said, his tone grudgingly respectful, though it held an edge. "Don't disappoint me now. All of you girls, you think you know what's best for yourselves. But only I know what's best for you." His voice grew colder, more commanding, as he continued. "Take Alex, for example. She was so reluctant to marry Lord Tully, begging me for weeks to call off the betrothal. She cried, pleaded, said she didn't want it." Roslyn's heart tightened, remembering Alex's reluctance. Alex had been inconsolable when the prospect of marriage was suggested. But none of that had mattered to their father. "And now look at her," Walder went on, a proud, almost triumphant gleam in his eyes. "Lady of the Riverlands. Lady Tully." He leaned in slightly, his voice lowering to a rasping whisper, as if imparting some great truth. "I put her there. It was me who saw what she couldn't see, who made sure she had a future worth something. Just like I've done for all of you." Roslyn met his gaze, her expression unyielding despite the pressure of his words. She had always known her father took pride in controlling the fates of his daughters and granddaughters, molding their lives to suit his ambitions, regardless of their desires. To him, they were pieces to be moved on a grand chessboard, securing power and alliances. He would never understand that there was more to life, more to marriage, more to family, than simply power and position. "And what about Alex?" Roslyn asked quietly, her voice steady but firm, holding back the surge of frustration she felt. "Does she thank you for that? Is she happy, Father?" Walder scoffed, waving her question away as though it were nothing more than an inconvenience. "She looks happy enough to me," he muttered, his tone dismissive. "And even if she isn't, she'll learn to be content with the power and influence I've given her." He glanced at Roslyn, his eyes sharp, full of the cold practicality she had known all her life. "It's not about love or happiness, girl," he continued, his voice hardening. "It's about survival. It's about making sure our name means something, that we don't get cast aside like so many others. You may not think it, but I would do anything for this family. Anything. And I'll crush anyone who gets in my way." His voice dropped, laden with a grim satisfaction. "Look at Hoster Tully." Roslyn's heart stopped. Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at him, her pulse quickening. "What?" she said sharply, interrupting him. "What did you just say?" Walder paused, his eyes narrowing at her sudden reaction. His lips curled into a knowing smirk, as if he had just said too much but didn't mind. There was a flicker of cruel amusement in his gaze, the sort of look that Roslyn had seen countless times, though rarely directed at her. He was testing her, pushing her. I said, "Look at Hoster Tully," he repeated, his voice slower now, more deliberate. The old fool was set in his ways, thought he could ignore me. Thought he could keep us out. But I'm not the kind of man you ignore, Roslyn. I don't take well to being brushed aside. Roslyn's hands tightened around Torrin, her knuckles white. "What did you do?" she whispered, barely able to get the words out. Walder's grin widened, his eyes gleaming with something dark and unsettling. "I did what needed to be done. Hoster Tully didn't want his precious Riverlands tied to Housefree, didn't think we were good enough. So I reminded him who holds the power now. And look where his line is, the last Tully, his son, marrying my granddaughter. Everything he fought to keep from me, I took." Roslyn's blood ran cold. She had always known her father was ruthless, but the way he spoke now, with such casual cruelty, sent a shiver down her spine. The Tullys had been honorable people, good people, and if her father had a hand in Hoster Tully's decline. "What did you do to him?" she demanded, her voice rising despite the weight of fear settling in her chest. Walder shrugged, his smirk fading into something more dangerous. "Does it matter? The point is, I did what I had to. It's how I've kept this family strong, how I've ensured our survival. You may not like my methods, Roslyn, but don't forget, you benefit from them." Roslyn's heart pounded in her chest, the weight of her father's words crashing down on her. Hoster Tully had been ill for years, but was it truly natural, or had her father had a hand in it, ensuring the Tullys bent to his will? She didn't know for certain, but the thought of it twisted her insides with a sickening dread. He grunted once more, but this time the sound lacked its usual force. Without another word, he turned to leave, his steps slow and heavy. "You may not like it, girl," he muttered over his shoulder, his voice quieter now, almost resigned. "But don't forget, it's my blood that runs in your veins." Roslyn sat still, watching her father shuffle toward the exit, his once overbearing presence somehow diminished in that moment. But before he reached the door, he stopped, turning back to glance at her one last time. His expression softened, if only slightly, as his gaze settled on her and Torrin cradled in her arms. "In this light," he said, his voice unexpectedly tender, "when you're holding him like that, you look like your mother." For a fleeting second, there was something almost human in his face, an echo of a past Roslyn had never truly known. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. He turned and continued out of the hall, leaving Roslyn to sit with the weight of his words. She had never known her mother well, but in that brief moment, she wondered what memories had stirred in her father, and whether they held any real warmth or were simply fragments of a life long buried under his cold ambition. Roslyn glanced down at Torrin, brushing a soft kiss to his head, and whispered, "I hope I'm more like her than him." Chapter 47, Roslyn 19. Chapter text. Act 2. Roslyn 19. It has been 5 years since the coronation of King Tommen I. The realm is at peace. Roslyn hurried through the shadowed halls of Winterfell, her steps quickening with each passing moment. Panic fluttered in her chest as she scanned the dimly lit corridors. "Torrin," she called, her voice tinged with rising anxiety. She turned corners, her gown brushing against the cold stone walls as she peered into rooms, her heart pounding louder with every second her son remained unseen. "Torrin," she called again, more urgently now, her eyes darting around in search of him, her thoughts racing. Where could he be? She needed to find him, had to find him. As Roslyn rushed through the halls, servants hurriedly passed by, offering quick curtsies before resuming their daily tasks. She barely noticed them, her focus solely on finding her son. "Torrin," she called again, her voice echoing through the stone corridors. Finally, she reached the courtyard, her breath catching in relief as she spotted Torrin perched on a low stone wall by the archery posts. "Torrin Stark," she called, her tone a mixture of exasperation and affection. The boy, now 5 and full of energy, turned to her with a wide grin. "Mama," he shouted back, waving enthusiastically. His adventurous spirit had only grown with time, and he often darted through Winterfell's halls, slipping away from his parents and grandparents with mischievous ease. Standing beside him was Arya Stark, now a young woman of 15, her confidence evident as she held a bow in hand. She looked over at Roslyn with a reassuring smile. He's all right with me, Arya said casually. He wanted to watch me shoot. Roslyn let out a relieved sigh, her heart slowing as she crossed the courtyard toward them. Thank you, Arya, she said, her tone softening. Torren had always looked up to Arya, and it was no surprise that he'd found his way to her side. He's quite the little explorer, isn't he? Arya added with a grin, ruffling Torren's auburn hair. Roslyn smiled, shaking her head fondly at her son's antics. That he is, she replied, her heart swelling with affection. Though he seems more determined to escape me every day. You had better get ready, Arya. People are set to arrive this afternoon. The air was thick with anticipation, as preparations for the evening's festivities had been in full swing for days. Arya's expression shifted as she looked down, her brow furrowing. I really don't want to do this, Ro. There was a heaviness in her tone, a reluctance that spoke volumes. Roslyn reached out, placing a comforting hand on Arya's shoulder. I know it's not what you envisioned for yourself. But Alan Umber is a good match, and your brother believes it will do us well to strengthen our ties with House Umber. The betrothal had been arranged 2 years ago, a strategic alliance that promised security for Arya. Alan was the second son of the great Jon, known for his solid character and loyalty, qualities that would serve Arya well in a world filled with uncertainty. But I'm not ready to marry, Ro. Arya exclaimed, her voice rising in frustration. I want to explore the world, to fight, to be free. I don't want to be tied down to some lord's expectations. Roslyn sighed, understanding her good sister's desire for independence. She too had once felt the weight of duty pressing upon her, the expectations of their family and the political games that often overshadowed their lives. I understand, truly. But sometimes, we must navigate through the paths laid out for us before we can forge our own. Arya crossed her arms, her rebellious spirit flaring. But what if I don't want to follow that path? What if I want to carve out my own? Her fiery spirit was palpable, a reminder of the girl who had defied convention and fought for her place in a world dominated by men. Roslyn smiled gently, admiring her sister's tenacity. And you will, Arya. You have that fire in you. Just remember, marriage doesn't mean you have to lose who you are. You can still be the fierce warrior you've always wanted to be. Arya seemed to ponder this, her fierce gaze softening just a bit. Maybe she conceded reluctantly. But it doesn't change the fact that I'm still not looking forward to it. Perhaps we can find a way to make the evening enjoyable, Roslyn suggested, hoping to lift her good sister's spirits. We'll have music, dancing, and I'm sure there will be plenty of interesting lords and ladies to meet. Or we could sneak off and find some trouble to stir, Arya replied with a hint of a smirk, the spark of mischief returning to her eyes. Roslyn laughed, the sound echoing softly in the courtyard. I wouldn't dare encourage such behavior. But perhaps just a little fun before you fulfill your duties. Roslyn carefully helped Torren down from the stone wall, his small feet hitting the ground with a soft thud. As they began walking toward the keep, the air around them felt alive with the sounds of Winterfell, laughter, the clattering of hooves, and the distant echo of hammers ringing against anvils. 5 years had passed since she first made this castle her home, and she couldn't shake the strange sensation that she had become a part of its very stones. She had only left once, for a brief trip to the twins for her father's funeral the previous year, but even that felt like a distant memory. With each step, Roslyn struggled to recall her life before Winterfell. King's Landing now seemed like a dream, a hazy recollection of sun-soaked gardens and the oppressive weight of court politics. The court, the whispered conspiracies, and the chilling moments of betrayal felt like the echoes of a long-forgotten song. The price she had paid for those memories was steep, and she often wondered if the cost had been worth it. She glanced at Torren, who was excitedly chattering about something he had seen in the courtyard, his small voice breaking through her reverie. His laughter was a balm to her soul, reminding her of the joy that had blossomed in her life since coming to Winterfell. Yet beneath the surface, a gnawing discomfort remained, a lingering shadow from her past that she couldn't quite shake. When she had heard of Petyr Baelish and Shay's execution, a sickening twist had tightened in her stomach. Their deaths had been a punishment for the crimes she had committed, though she alone had been left to bear the burden. Her own punishment had been one of silence. She had been forced to take her secrets to the grave, forbidden from sharing the truth with anyone, not even with Robb. It felt like an iron shackle around her heart, tightening with every passing day. As they approached the towering doors of the keep, Rosalind forced a smile, pushing aside the dark thoughts that had threatened to cloud her heart. The solid wooden doors loomed before them, intricately carved with the sigil of House Stark, and she felt a sense of safety in their presence. "What were you talking about, my little adventurer?" she asked Torren, bending slightly to meet his bright, curious eyes. "Papa told me that people are coming to see me," Torren exclaimed, his voice filled with excitement. His eyes sparkled with the thrill of anticipation, and Rosalind couldn't help but feel a warmth spreading in her chest at his innocent enthusiasm. "Not you, love, but your Aunt Arya," Rosalind replied gently, brushing a strand of hair behind his ear. "It's a big day for her, and she'll need your help to protect her until her new husband arrives." "I can help," Torren declared, puffing out his chest in a show of bravado. "Papa said I'm the best fighter in the north, just like Uncle John." Rosalind felt a mixture of pride and worry at his words. Robb often boasted about their son's swordplay, having started training with wooden swords just last year. "You certainly have the spirit of a Stark, my brave little warrior," she said, chuckling softly. Jon Snow had made the odd visit in the years they had been back at Winterfell. His visits were often disguised as diplomatic ones, petitioning for more supplies and men, but everyone in the family understood the truth: Jon missed his family more than words could express. Every time he arrived, it felt like a breath of fresh air, a reminder of his bond with Robb and shared history. Though it had been a few years since his last visit, Jon had made a huge impression on Torren. Rosalind remembered the way Jon's eyes would light up upon seeing Torren, the way he would ruffle his hair and share stories of his own adventures beyond the wall. She could only imagine the lessons Jon had imparted to her son, tales of bravery and honor that would shape Torren into the kind of man they all hoped he would become. "Uncle Jon is proud of you, you know," Rosalind said, ruffling Torren's hair in return, feeling a swell of affection. "He believes in you, just as much as your father does." Torren's face lit up at the mention of his uncle. "I'll be just like him," he exclaimed, his confidence radiating. "When I grow up, I'll protect everyone." "Of course you will," my sweet Rosalind said, her heart swelling with hope. She took a moment to reflect on how quickly her little boy was growing up, how he was absorbing the lessons of loyalty and courage from the men in their family. As they stepped through the grand doors of the keep, the familiar warmth of the hearth welcomed them. The sounds of clattering dishes and muffled laughter filled the air, signaling that the preparations for the day's events were in full swing. Rosalind felt the bustle of life around her, invigorating her spirits despite the shadows that occasionally threatened to creep back in. "Arya will need all the help she can get," Rosalind said, her tone turning playful. "You'll have to keep all those lords and ladies in line." Torren grinned, his small stature exuding a sense of determination that was contagious. "I won't let anyone bother her. I'll scare them away if they try." Rosalind couldn't help but laugh at his fierce resolve. "That's the spirit. But remember, sometimes a kind word is mightier than a sword." Torren scrunched up his nose in contemplation, clearly weighing the wisdom of his mother's advice. "I'll try both," he said after a moment, his smile returning as they moved deeper into the keep. With her heart lightened by his exuberance, Rosalind took Torren's hand as they made their way through the lively keep. The warmth of family surrounded them, and for now, the shadows of her past faded into the background, leaving only the promise of a bright future ahead. Just as they rounded the bend, Rosalind caught sight of Robb emerging from a room ahead, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. He was no longer the young boy she had once known but a man of 21, his features sharpened with age. A light beard now framed his strong jaw, giving him an air of maturity, and the last traces of his teenage softness had long since faded. Before Rosalind could say a word, Torren's face lit up with excitement, his eyes instantly locking onto his father. "Papa!" Torren shouted, his small feet pounding the stone floor as he bolted toward Robb. Without hesitation, Robb knelt, opening his arms wide to catch their son, who crashed into him with all the energy of a boy his age. "Hello, my little soldier," Robb said, his voice warm as he scooped Torren up with ease. Torren giggled as his father lifted him effortless, his small hands gripping Robb's tunic. "Have you been terrorizing your poor mother again?" Robb teased, raising an eyebrow at his son, though his gaze flicked to Rosalind, full of affection. Torren shook his head vigorously, his messy curls bouncing as he replied, "No, Papa." "Oh. Rob said, glancing at Roslyn, a playful grin tugging at the corner of his lips. Is that so? His blue eyes sparkled with mischief as he studied his wife, silently asking if their son's claim held any truth. Roslyn smiled, tilting her head slightly as she looked at Rob and Torrin, her two loves standing before her. He's been rather well behaved, she admitted, though her tone carried a hint of teasing. For today, at least. Rob laughed, the deep sound filling the corridor, echoing off the walls. Is that what we're calling it now? He leaned in closer to Torrin, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. You've got to keep your mother on her toes, you know. It's part of the job. Torrin's face lit up with a mischievous grin, his eyes twinkling as he nodded enthusiastically, clearly eager to accept his father's playful advice. Roslyn shook her head, though her heart was light. You two are terrible influences on each other, she said, though there was no real accusation in her words, only love. Rob stood, still holding Torrin, and walked toward Roslyn, his gaze softening as he reached her side. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder and leaned down to kiss her forehead. That's how it's meant to be, he murmured, his voice low and filled with warmth. Roslyn felt the familiar flutter in her chest at the touch of his lips, the weight of their shared life settling comfortably around her. You'll both be the death of me, she said with a mock sigh, though she couldn't help but smile. Rob chuckled, easily balancing Torrin on his hip, the boy's small arms wrapped around his neck. Not if I can help it, he replied, his voice low and playful. He shot Roslyn a roguish grin, his eyes twinkling with that familiar mischief that always seemed to lighten the weight of their responsibilities. Roslyn couldn't help but smile back, her heart swelling at the sight of her husband and son together, their bond unbreakable. Rob then turned his attention to Torrin, his expression softening but still carrying a hint of playful seriousness. Now he said, raising an eyebrow, are you ready for today's big event? You'll need to be on your best behavior, young wolf. Torrin straightened in Rob's arms, his little face taking on a look of determination. I can do it, Papa, he said, his voice filled with a seriousness that belied his 5 years. I'll be good, and I'll help Aunt Arya if she needs me. Rob laughed, giving Torrin's side a playful squeeze. That's my boy. Remember, your aunt's day is a big one, and she might be nervous. It's your job to keep her smiling, all right? Torrin nodded eagerly. I'll make her laugh, just like you do, Papa. Roslyn's heart melted at the exchange, watching as Rob gently set Torrin back down on the ground. Their son immediately took off running ahead, no doubt filled with excitement for the afternoon's events. As Rob turned back to her, his grin softened into something more intimate, his hand slipping around her waist to pull her closer. Think he's ready? He asked, his voice quieter now, meant only for her. Roslyn leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder for just a moment, savoring the warmth of him beside her. I think he's more ready than we are, she whispered with a smile. He's growing up so fast. Rob kissed the top of her head, his lips lingering there for a heartbeat longer than usual. Just like his mother, he murmured. Brave and strong. He'll be just fine, Ro. We all will. They had tried for more children after Torrin, hoping to expand their little family, but despite their love and efforts, they struggled to conceive. Twice, Roslyn had become pregnant, and twice, she had miscarried, leaving both her and Rob heartbroken. After the second loss, the Maester delivered the news they had feared most, for Roslyn's health. They should not attempt to have any more children. It had been a crushing blow. Roslyn wrestled with the weight of it, the deep sadness gnawing at her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had failed, not just herself, but Rob, her family, and even her ancestors who had counted on her to help secure the future of the Starks. The thought of never giving Rob another child haunted her, and no matter how much he reassured her, a quiet sense of guilt lingered in her heart. The news was still raw when a letter arrived from her niece, Alex, only weeks later, announcing the birth of her third child with Edmure Tully in as many years. Roslyn had read the letter alone in her chambers, her hands trembling as her eyes scanned the words. She had tried to feel happiness for her, but instead, the ache inside her deepened, twisting into something unbearable. The walls of Winterfell seemed to close in around her, and the pain she had kept hidden for Rob's sake overwhelmed her, sending her into a dark spiral of grief. Rob had found her sitting on the floor by the hearth that night, her tears silent but endless. He didn't say anything at first, just knelt beside her, wrapping his arms around her as if trying to shield her from the pain. She had sobbed into his chest, finally letting go of all the sorrow she had bottled up. "I've let you down," she had whispered, her voice barely audible between her tears. "I couldn't give you more children. I'm not enough." Rob had pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands, his blue eyes soft but full of conviction. "Roslyn, you could never let me down," he said firmly, his voice filled with nothing but love. "I have my heir, and he is perfect. But more than that, I have you. I don't need anything more than you and Torrin." She had tried to argue, to tell him he deserved more, but Rob shook his head, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "You are enough, Ro. More than enough. Don't ever think you've failed me, or anyone else. I love you." His words had been her lifeline, pulling her back from the edge of despair. Slowly, over time, she had begun to accept that their family, small as it was whole, complete in its own way. Torrin was their pride and joy, and Roslyn had come to realize that she didn't need more children to prove her worth or her love for Rob. He loved her as she was, and that was more than enough. And every time she watched Rob with Torrin, laughing, teaching him, carrying him on his shoulders, Roslyn felt that love echo inside her, steady and unshakable. It had been a long afternoon, with the northern lords and ladies arriving in a steady flow for hours. Each arrival required a formal introduction, a process that demanded patience and composure. The Stark family stood strong and unified, their presence commanding respect in the great hall of Winterfell. Rob and Roslyn were at the forefront, the image of northern strength and leadership, while Ned and Catelyn stood beside them, holding their own quiet authority. On the opposite side stood Arya, though she looked less enthusiastic about the formalities, her gaze often drifting away from the processions, along with Torrin, who was equally as uninterested. The last few years had changed them all, reshaping their lives and testing their resilience. After finally dispelling the remaining Iron Islanders from the north, Ned Stark had relinquished his command completely, handing over the reins of leadership to Rob for good. He was more than content to retreat from the weight of power, embracing the simpler pleasures of life as a grandfather. He now spent his days with his family, the weariness of years in battle and governance finally lifted from his shoulders. Yet, though his titles and responsibilities had lessened, the wisdom and quiet strength that made him so revered remained. Catelyn, on the other hand, had never truly recovered from the heartbreak of losing Bran and Rickon. Their disappearance had carved a wound so deep that even the passage of time could not begin to heal it. The search for the boys had spanned the north and even stretched beyond, but no trace of them was ever found. Weeks turned into months, and the family, one by one, had begun to mourn them as lost, believing the worst. Rob, devastated by the loss of his brothers, had lit a candle for them every day for a year, offering his prayers and silent grief to the old gods. But not Catelyn. She refused to accept the notion that her sons were gone. While the rest of the family carried on with the weight of their grief, she clung to hope with a stubborn fierceness that had come to define her. "I know they are alive," she would say whenever the topic arose, her voice unwavering despite the strain in her eyes. Her heart seemed caught in a place between hope and despair, and no amount of reasoning could sway her conviction. Even now, as she stood beside Ned, greeting each noble and lord who passed, there was a distant look in her eyes, as if her thoughts were forever somewhere else, somewhere out there, searching for her lost boys. The announcer's voice boomed through the grand hall, cutting through the lively chatter of the gathered lords and ladies. Lord Tyrion and Lady Sansa Lannister, with their son Daemon. As the heavy doors swung open, Roslyn's heart quickened in anticipation. Tyrion Lannister stepped through, and despite the 5 years that had passed, he appeared much the same as she remembered. His features were still sharp, his stature modest, yet his presence radiated confidence and wit. His signature half-smile played at the corners of his mouth, a testament to his resilient spirit and enduring charm. But it was Sansa who truly captivated Roslyn's attention. No longer the timid girl she once knew, she was now a poised young woman of 19. Her auburn hair was expertly braided in intricate designs, cascading down her shoulders in soft waves that caught the light. The Lannister red of her gown hugged her form beautifully, adorned with delicate gold embroidery that shimmered with every step she took. It was a color that spoke of power and status, yet it did nothing to overshadow the grace with which she carried herself. Following closely behind them was Daemon, their son, who appeared to be only a half-year younger than Torrin. He had inherited the golden hair and striking green eyes of House Lannister, the vivid hue reminiscent of a summer's day. Roslin tried to search his features for a hint of Joffrey, but all she could see was Sansa. It was in the set of his jaw, the shape of his lips, and the mischievous spark in his eyes, a reflection of his mother's resilience and warmth. As they moved deeper into the hall, Roslin felt a swell of emotions. Sansa had endured so much, and yet here she stood, a formidable woman and a devoted mother, unyielded by her past. Daemon reached for Sansa's hand, looking up at her with a mixture of admiration and adoration, reminding Roslin of Torrhen's own affection for her. In that moment, the shadows of their shared history faded, leaving behind the promise of new beginnings and the hope of brighter days ahead. The trio moved forward, and as they approached, Roslin couldn't help but feel a sense of warmth and kinship. Lord Stark, Lady Stark, Tyrion greeted warmly, his voice carrying a mixture of formality and genuine fondness. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture of respect that came naturally to him, before allowing a playful grin to break across his features. "Thank you for hosting us. It's a privilege to be welcomed into your home once again." As he spoke, Roslin noticed the twinkle in his eye, a glimmer of mischief that suggested he was already contemplating a witty remark or a light-hearted jest. His presence had a way of lifting the atmosphere around him, and Roslin felt the tension in the hall ease just a bit at his arrival. Robb stepped forward, extending his hand to clasp Tyrion's forearm in a gesture of camaraderie. "It's good to see you, Tyrion." "The North has missed your company," he replied, his voice rich with sincerity. Sansa, standing beside Tyrion, offered a gentle smile to Roslin and Robb, her blue eyes sparkling with joy. "It's wonderful to be back at Winterfell," she said, her voice steady yet laced with an unmistakable excitement. She hadn't been home to Winterfell since she had first left for King's Landing a lifetime ago. Sansa smiled brightly, her eyes shimmering with gratitude and relief. "It feels wonderful to be back, Roslin. I've missed you all so much," she said, her voice tinged with genuine emotion. As the group moved further into the hall, Sansa and Tyrion took their time greeting each member of the Stark family, their smiles and laughter echoing warmly against the stone walls. Sansa embraced her parents tightly, the bond between them palpable. After spending half a year in Casterly Rock helping Sansa after Daemon's birth, Catelyn radiated joy as she held her daughter close. Their hug lingered, both women savoring the moment, sharing silent words of encouragement and love. Daemon, a timid boy, darted away from Sansa for a moment, a gleam of mischief in his gaze, before rushing into the welcoming embrace of his grandmother. Catelyn knelt down, her arms open wide, and the boy melted into her embrace, a broad smile stretching across his face as he nestled against her. "Grandma," he exclaimed, laughter bubbling from his lips. Roslin watched this sweet exchange with a gentle smile, her heart swelling at the sight of the family reunited. It was a bittersweet reminder of the joys and sorrows they had all faced over the years, but the happiness that filled the hall was undeniable. Catelyn's eyes glistened with love as she hugged Daemon, her fingers tangling in his hair, a moment of pure maternal affection that warmed the room. "Look at you, my brave little knight," Catelyn said, her voice soft and tender as she crouched down to meet Daemon at eye level. "You've grown so much since I last saw you. Have you been practicing your swordplay?" Daemon shook his head vigorously, his golden curls bouncing with the movement. "No, I've mostly been reading with Papa," he replied, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "He's been teaching me about dragons." Catelyn raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. "Dragons? Oh, my. That sounds very intriguing. Tell me more, sweet boy. What have you learned?" Daemon's face lit up, clearly thrilled to share his newfound knowledge. There were these huge, scaly beasts that could breathe fire. He gestured animatedly, his hands mimicking the flapping of wings. "Papa says they used to fly all over Westeros, and they were so powerful that everyone feared them. But they were also beautiful. He says the biggest one was named Balerion the Black Dread." Catelyn listened intently, nodding along as Daemon spoke, her heart swelling with pride at his enthusiasm. "Oh, I remember hearing stories about Balerion," she replied, reminiscing about the tales of old. "He was a fierce creature indeed, and one of the greatest dragons to ever live. Did your father tell you about the Targaryens and how they rode those magnificent beasts?" Daemon's eyes widened even further as he continued to relay what he had learned. "Yes. He said the Targaryens used to ride dragons into battle, and that they could control them with a bond. Can you imagine that, Grandma? Riding a dragon high above the clouds. Catelyn chuckled softly, enchanted by his imagination. I can only imagine how thrilling that must be. But you know, dear, just because you're not wielding a sword doesn't mean you're not brave. It takes courage to read about those who came before us and learn from their stories. Maybe one day, you will be both a knight and a scholar. Daemon beamed with pride at Catelyn's words, his youthful enthusiasm lighting up his face. That's what Papa says. He says knowledge is power, and the more you learn, the stronger you become. At that, Catelyn's expression softened, a bittersweet smile gracing her lips as her thoughts turned to Tyrion. Memories of his resilience and intelligence flooded her mind, reminding her of the many challenges he had faced and overcome in a world that often underestimated him. You know, dear, she said gently, maybe you should tell your cousin Torrhen all about the dragons. I'm sure he would love to hear your stories. Daemon's eyes widened with excitement at the idea. Oh, yes. We can play knights and dragons, and I can show him the pictures in the books. Papa has so many stories. He jumped up and down, his golden curls bouncing wildly. The thought of sharing his newfound knowledge with his cousin filled him with glee. Catelyn chuckled softly, imagining the two boys together, their laughter echoing through the ancient halls of Winterfell. I think that would make both of you very happy. You could teach him about Balerion the Black Dread and all the other dragons your father has told you about. Maybe even how to draw them. Daemon's face lit up even more at the thought of drawing dragons. Yes. I can make a whole book of dragons. Torrhen can help me, and then we can have a dragon adventure. His eyes sparkled with imagination, picturing the two of them racing through the snowy woods, battling imaginary foes with their swords while dragons soared above them. Catelyn smiled, her heart swelling with warmth as she watched Daemon's enthusiasm. It was a beautiful reminder of the joy that childhood could bring, even amidst the shadows of the past. Just remember, little knight, she said, kneeling to meet his gaze, adventures are best when shared with friends and family. And your cousin will cherish every moment you spend together. Can we find the dragons in the woods? Daemon asked, his voice filled with innocent wonder. I want to be brave like the knights in Papa's stories. Catelyn laughed, the sound light and melodic. You never know what you might discover in those woods. With a newfound determination, Daemon nodded eagerly. I'll be the bravest knight ever. And Torrhen can be my squire. His excitement was infectious, and Catelyn felt a wave of hope wash over her. Perhaps, in their innocence and imagination, the next generation could weave a brighter future, a future where the shadows of the past would not dictate their destinies. As the two continued their conversation, Roslyn looked on, her heart swelling with affection for both her son and the child of Sansa and Tyrion. In moments like these, surrounded by family and laughter, she felt a flicker of hope that the bonds they were forming would outlast the trials of their past. Chapter 48, Sansa v. Chapter text. Sansa v. It was late in the evening when the Umbers finally arrived at Winterfell. The long day had stretched into night, and the flickering torches cast dancing shadows across the courtyard. She watched from the sidelines as the young Umber heir introduced himself to Arya, a hint of amusement tugging at her lips. The boy, with his awkwardness and nervous energy, seemed completely unaware of the fierce spirit that was her sister. Arya would surely eat him alive, she thought with a smile, but there was something sweet about their interaction that sparked a flicker of hope in her heart. The ceremony for Arya and Alan Umber would take place the following evening, and after the long journey, Sansa felt an overwhelming desire to retreat to the safety of her chambers. The weight of the day pressed heavily upon her, and she welcomed the thought of rest. Roslyn had kindly offered for Daemon to stay with Torrhen in the nursery, a gesture that made Sansa both grateful but apprehensive. She hesitated at first, her protective instincts flaring. But Roslyn had reassured her, and Daemon had been eager to stay, begging her to let him play with his cousin. Eventually, she relented, recognizing that Torrhen would be a good companion for him. As she watched them head off together, her heart ached with a mixture of pride and sorrow. Just a few years ago, when Daemon was born, Sansa had struggled with her feelings, seeing only the reflection of Joffrey in her son's face. Tyrion had been so understanding, sending for her mother to help, but in those early days, Sansa felt unworthy of holding her own child, trapped by the memories that haunted her. But now, as she gazed at Damon laughing with Torren, she could see how far she had come. The regret that once enveloped her seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of pride and love that filled her heart. When she looked at Damon now, she saw not just the shadow of his father but the vibrant spirit of her son, alive with curiosity and innocence. Damon beamed with pride as he spoke about the dragons Tyrion had been teaching him about. It warmed her heart to hear him share his knowledge. In that moment, Sansa saw the bond forming between them, a connection that transcended the past and embodied a brighter future. Tyrion was Damon's father in every way that mattered. Sansa made her way through the familiar corridors of Winterfell, her footsteps echoing softly against the stone floors. Roslyn had insisted that she stay in her old chambers,